The night they came for her with torches, Rhett Calloway made a choice that would either save them both or destroy everything he'd built. But let me take you back to where it started, a dusty auction ground in 1881 Texas, where a man searching for a wounded horse found something far more dangerous. A girl nobody wanted, tied like livestock, silent as the grave. What happened next would turn an entire town upside down and prove that sometimes the loudest love stories are the ones never spoken aloud. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The Texas sun beat down on Rhett Calloway's neck like a branding iron as he pushed through the crowd at Morrison's livestock auction. Dust kicked up from boots and hooves, coating everything in a fine brown powder that stuck to sweat-slicked skin. The smell hit him first: manure, tobacco spit, and desperation all mixed together in the September heat. He wasn't looking for trouble. Hell, he never looked for trouble. Trouble just had a way of finding him anyway. Looking for a mare, he'd told himself that morning, cinching his saddle before the 2-hour ride into town. That's all. Find the wounded mare Henderson mentioned, get her cheap, fix her up. Simple, clean. The kind of transaction that didn't require talking to more than 2 people. Rhett hated crowds, hated the way men looked at him when they recognized the Calloway name, like they were waiting for him to explode the way his father used to. Like violence was hereditary, passed down through blood whether you wanted it or not. He was 35 years old, and he'd spent the last 15 trying to prove he wasn't his father. Some days it felt like pissing into the wind. The auction yard sprawled across 2 acres of trampled grass behind Morrison's general store. Cattle pens on the left, horse corrals on the right, and in the middle, a wooden platform where Morrison himself stood with his hammer, calling out prices in a voice like gravel scraping metal. Rhett kept his head down, scanning the horse pens for the mare. Wounded left foreleg, Henderson had said. Pretty thing otherwise, just needed someone with patience to... Goddamn useless creature. The shout cut through the general noise of the auction. Rhett's shoulders tensed automatically. Not your business, he told himself. Keep walking. I said move! The voice again, slurred and angry. Rhett's boots stopped of their own accord. He stood there a moment, jaw working, telling himself to keep going. The mare was probably 3 pens down. He could see her from here if he just... A yelp. High-pitched. Not quite a scream, but close. Christ, Rhett muttered, and turned toward the sound. He found them near the back of the auction ground, almost hidden behind a cattle pen. A man, 40-something, belly hanging over his belt, face red from drink or sun or both, had his hand wrapped around the wrist of a girl who couldn't have been more than 19. She was thin, wearing a dress that had been gray once but was mostly brown now, with dirt and God knew what else. Her dark hair hung in tangles past her shoulders. The man yanked her forward and she stumbled, bare feet scrambling for purchase in the dirt. There was a rope tied around her wrist, the other end wrapped around the man's meaty palm. Rhett's stomach turned. What the hell? The words came out before he could stop them. The drunk man's head swung toward him, eyes narrowing. Ain't your concern, friend. Doesn't look friendly from where I'm standing. Rhett took a step closer, scanning the girl's face. She kept her eyes down, shoulders hunched like she was trying to disappear into herself. The man spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Selling her off is all. Got her from her worthless brother up north who couldn't feed her no more. Thought I'd get some use out of her, but she's broken. He shook her wrist for emphasis. Deaf as a post. Can't hear a damn thing. Won't talk neither. Useless. The girl flinched but didn't make a sound. Rhett felt something cold settle in his chest. You can't sell a person. Sure I can. You new to Texas, boy? The man grinned, showing brown teeth. Ain't a person if she can't even talk. More like livestock, you ask me, and livestock gets sold. A small crowd had started to gather. Rhett recognized a few faces. Sam Porter from the feed store, old widow Mackenzie, the Brennan brothers who ran cattle south of town. Nobody was stepping in. They just watched, like this was part of the show. How much? Rhett heard himself say. The drunk man's eyebrows went up. You interested? How? Much? Well now. The man scratched his belly, considering. She eats like a bird, don't complain none since she can't talk. Good for cleaning, I reckon, if you don't mind the strangeness. Tell you what, $30 and she's yours. 20, Rhett said flatly. 25. 20 or I walk. The man's jaw worked. He looked at the girl, then back at Rhett. Fine, 20. But you're taking her as is. She does something crazy. That's on you. Town thinks she's cursed, you know. Bad luck to keep someone like that around. I'll manage, Rhett said, pulling bills from his pocket. His hands weren't quite steady. He wasn't sure what he was doing. This was insane. He came for a horse, and now he was buying a girl like she was. The drunk man snatched the money, counted it twice, then shoved the rope into Rhett's hand. Pleasure doing business. Rhett looked down at the rope, then at the girl. She was staring at the ground still, her whole body rigid. Up close he could see bruises on her arms, old and new, yellow and purple mixing together like some kind of horrible painting. He wanted to throw up. Instead, he carefully unwound the rope from his hand and knelt down in front of her. The crowd got quiet. He could feel their eyes on him, curious, judgmental, waiting for something to happen. Rhett reached for the knot at her wrist slowly, like he was approaching a spooked horse. I'm going to take this off, he said quietly, even though she couldn't hear him. All right? Her eyes flicked up for just a second. They were gray, storm-colored, and so full of fear it made his chest ache. He untied the knot, working the rough hemp loose from her skin. There were raw marks underneath, red and angry. How long had she been tied up like this? When the rope fell away, the girl didn't move. She just stood there, swaying slightly, like she didn't know what to do with freedom. You got a name? Rhett asked, then felt stupid. Of course she couldn't answer. Leora! Someone called from the crowd. Rhett turned to see Morrison himself, the auctioneer, watching from a few yards away. That's what the brother called her when he brought her through last month, Leora. Leora, Rhett repeated, testing it. The girl's eyes flicked up again at the sound. Could she read lips, maybe? He'd heard of people doing that. He stood slowly, keeping his movements careful. I'm Rhett. You're safe now. Understand? She didn't respond, just watched him with those gray eyes, waiting. Right, Rhett muttered. Well, let's get you out of here. He started toward the horse pens, then realized she wasn't following. She was still standing there, frozen, like she didn't believe she was allowed to move. Come on, Rhett said, gesturing. This way. Nothing. Sam Porter called out from the crowd. She ain't gonna listen to you, Calloway. Told you she's simple in the head. She's not simple, Rhett shot back, surprising himself with the anger in his voice. She's scared. There's a difference. He walked back to Leora, slower this time, and held out his hand, palm up. Not grabbing, just offering. She looked at his hand for a long moment. Then, so tentatively it almost broke him, she placed her thin fingers in his palm. Her hand was ice cold despite the heat. Rhett led her through the crowd, ignoring the muttering and the stares. He could hear fragments of conversation following them. Cursed, unnatural. Calloway's lost his mind just like his daddy. Let them talk. He'd stopped caring what this town thought of him years ago. The wounded mare was exactly where Henderson said she'd be, favoring her left foreleg in the corner of the pen. She was a pretty thing, dappled gray with kind eyes. The injury looked old but badly healed. What do you think? Rhett asked Leora, not expecting an answer. But Leora pulled her hand free from his and walked straight to the pen fence. The mare's ears went back, suspicious. Most people would have stopped there, given the horse space. Leora didn't stop. She climbed over the fence, graceful despite everything, and approached the mare with her hand outstretched. The horse snorted, stamping her good foreleg. Careful, Rhett started to say, but Leora wasn't listening. Of course she wasn't listening. She kept walking, slow and steady, until she was close enough to touch the mare's neck. Her hand settled there, gentle. The mare's ears swiveled forward. Then, impossibly, the horse lowered her head and huffed against Leora's shoulder. Rhett had been working with horses his entire life. He'd never seen one calm down that fast. I'll be damned, he muttered. Morrison appeared beside him, hammer still in hand. That the one you want? I'll give you a good price, seeing as she's lame. How much? $15. Rhett pulled out more bills, watching Leora stroke the mare's neck. The horse had completely relaxed, standing quiet while this strange girl ran her hands down the injured leg, examining it with a kind of focused attention that spoke of understanding. She's good with animals, Morrison observed. I'll give her that. Saw her calm a bull last month that was about to gore Henderson's boy. Just walked right up to it, fearless as anything. He paused. Course, that's what spooked folks. Ain't natural the way she knows things. Maybe she just pays attention, Rhett said, handing over the money. Maybe people don't give her enough credit. Morrison shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe the town's right and there's something wrong with her. Either way, she's your problem now. Rhett didn't answer. He was watching Leora help the mare limp toward the gate, moving at the horse's pace, supporting her weight when the leg buckled. Your problem now. Yeah. He was starting to realize that. Tichik. The ride back to the ranch took 3 hours instead of 2 because the mare couldn't move fast, and Leora had never ridden a horse before. Rhett had tried to get her to ride behind him on his gelding, but she'd looked at him with such panic that he'd backed off immediately. Instead, he walked beside her, leading both horses, while she stumbled along in her bare feet. After the first mile, he stopped. "This is stupid," he said, more to himself than to her. "You're going to tear your feet apart." He rummaged in his saddlebag and pulled out an old pair of socks. They were too big, but they'd help. He knelt down in front of her again, seemed like he was doing that a lot today, and pointed at her feet, then at the socks. She stared at him for a moment, then slowly she lifted one foot. Rhett helped her pull the socks on, trying not to think about how young she looked, how frightened. When he was done, he stood and gestured at his gelding. "You're riding," he said firmly, knowing she couldn't hear but hoping she'd understand the tone. "I'll lead him. It's fine." She looked at the horse, at him, at the horse again. Then she shook her head. "Leora," he caught himself. This was pointless. She couldn't hear his arguments. But she was watching his face, and maybe she saw the frustration there because she did something unexpected. She pointed at herself, then at the ground. Then she made a walking gesture with her fingers. "I'll walk." "You'll destroy your feet," Rhett said, then sighed. "Fine. We'll walk together." Her eyes widened slightly, surprised, maybe, like she hadn't expected him to back down. They walked. The Texas plains stretched out around them, endless and brown. Late September meant the heat was starting to break, but the sun still had teeth. Rhett kept checking on Leora from the corner of his eye, watching for signs she was struggling. She walked with her head down, hair falling forward to hide her face. Every so often, she'd glance at the wounded mare, and something would soften in her expression. Not quite a smile, but close. Around the second hour, Rhett noticed her limping. "Stop," he said, holding up his hand. She stopped, confused. He pointed at a cluster of rocks off the path. "Sit, rest." She looked uncertain, like she thought it might be a trick, like kindness was something she didn't recognize anymore. That made Rhett angrier than anything else that had happened today. Not at her, at whatever the hell her life had been before this moment. He walked to the rocks and sat down himself, making it clear this wasn't optional. After a moment, Leora followed and sat a few feet away, careful to keep distance between them. Smart girl. Rhett pulled a canteen from his saddle and took a long drink, then held it out to her. She stared at it. "Water," he said, miming drinking. She took the canteen with both hands like she was afraid of dropping it. When she drank, it was in small, careful sips, not gulps. Like she'd learned to make things last. "When's the last time you had a decent meal?" Rhett asked, knowing she couldn't answer. "Actually, don't tell me. I don't think I want to know." She finished drinking and handed the canteen back. Their fingers brushed. Hers were still cold. They sat there in silence, real silence, not the awkward kind, while the horses rested. Rhett found himself studying her profile when she wasn't looking. She had a straight nose, sharp cheekbones, pretty, underneath the dirt and fear. He wondered what she looked like when she smiled, if she remembered how to smile. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said quietly, not sure why he was talking since she couldn't hear anyway. "I came for a horse. That's it. But I saw that bastard dragging you around and I just..." He stopped, jaw tight. "Nobody should be treated like that. Nobody." Leora turned to look at him. There was something in her eyes, searching, like she was trying to figure him out. "I'm not a good man," Rhett continued, the words spilling out now. "My father made sure people know the Calloway name means trouble. But I'm not him. I'm trying not to be him." He laughed, bitter. "Though buying a girl at an auction probably isn't helping my case." He stood abruptly, angry at himself for talking. "Come on, let's get home before dark." Home. The word felt strange. The ranch house hadn't felt like a home in years. It was just a place he slept between working sunrise to sunset, trying to outrun memories. The last hour of walking passed in a blur. The sun was setting by the time the ranch came into view. A weathered house, a barn that needed repairs, corrals that looked empty without the cattle he'd sold off last spring. It wasn't much. But it was his. Leora stopped when she saw it, and for a horrible second Rhett thought she might run. He wouldn't chase her. If she wanted to leave, that was her choice. But she didn't run. She just stood there, staring at the house like she couldn't quite believe it was real. "It's not fancy," Rhett said, "but it's better than—" He stopped. Better than what? Better than being tied up and sold? That was a pretty low bar. He led the horses to the barn first, getting them settled in stalls with food and water. The wounded mare let Leora help again, standing patient while the girl examined her leg with gentle fingers. "We'll look at that proper tomorrow," Rhett said, watching them. "Get her fixed up." When the horses were settled, he brought Leora to the house. It was small, just a main room with a kitchen area, a bedroom, and a loft where he kept storage. The furniture was basic: a table, 2 chairs, a wood stove that heated the place in winter. Leora stood in the doorway, not entering, waiting. "You can come in," Rhett said, then realized how stupid that sounded. He waved her forward instead. She took 1 step inside, then another. Her eyes darted around the room, taking everything in: the dust on the table, the dishes he hadn't washed from breakfast, the rifle mounted above the door. "You'll sleep in the bedroom," Rhett said, pointing. "I'll take the loft." She looked at him, confused. He walked to the bedroom door and opened it, gesturing inside. "You. Sleep here." Understanding dawned in her eyes, then panic. She shook her head hard, backing up. "What?" Rhett started, then got it. "Of course." She thought he meant, "No," he said firmly, holding up both hands. "No, you sleep alone. I sleep up there." He pointed at the loft. "Separate. Understand?" She didn't look convinced. Rhett scrubbed a hand over his face, exhausted. "Look, I don't know how to make this clearer. You're safe here. I'm not going to—" He stopped. The words felt hollow. Men probably told her things were safe before, too. Instead, he walked to the loft ladder and climbed up, making a show of settling into the space up there. There was an old bedroll, some crates, enough room for him. When he looked down, Leora was watching him, something uncertain in her expression. "See?" he said. "Me up here, you down there. Safe." She stood there a moment longer. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she walked to the bedroom and disappeared inside. He heard the sound of the door closing. Not slamming, just clicking shut. Rhett let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Well," he said to the empty room, "this is my life now. Bodcat." He didn't sleep that night, partly because the loft was uncomfortable as hell, and partly because he kept listening for sounds from the bedroom. Crying, maybe. Or screaming. He didn't know what to expect, but there was nothing, just silence. Around midnight, he climbed down from the loft as quietly as he could and checked the bedroom door. It was still closed. He pressed his ear against it, listening, breathing, soft and steady. She was asleep. Rhett returned to the loft and stared at the ceiling, thinking about those gray eyes, the way she'd calmed the mare, the raw marks on her wrists. "What the hell did I just do?" he whispered to the darkness. The darkness, predictably, didn't answer. When dawn came, Rhett woke to the smell of coffee. He sat up so fast he hit his head on a roof beam. Damn! He scrambled down the ladder to find Leora standing by the wood stove, pouring coffee into a tin cup. She'd found his supplies somehow: beans, grinder, the old pot he used. The coffee was already brewing. She turned when she heard him, and for a second he saw fear flash across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by that careful blankness. "Morning," Rhett said, feeling awkward. "You didn't have to—" He stopped. She couldn't hear him. Leora held out the cup of coffee. Rhett took it, their fingers brushing again. "Thanks," he said, even though she couldn't hear that either. She'd cleaned up, he realized. Her face was scrubbed, her hair pulled back into a braid. She was still wearing the same filthy dress, but she'd done what she could. "I'll find you some clothes," Rhett said, gesturing at her dress and then at himself. "Something clean." She watched his hands, his face, trying to understand. This was going to be a problem. They needed a way to communicate. After breakfast, Leora made eggs somehow, using supplies he didn't even know he had. Rhett went to the small desk in the corner and found a piece of paper and a pencil. He brought them to the table and wrote in large letters, "My name is Rhett. What is your name?" He pushed the paper toward her. Leora stared at it for a long moment. Then she picked up the pencil. Her handwriting was shaky but readable. Leora Progress. Rhett wrote, "Can you read?" She nodded, then wrote, "A little. My mother teach me before she die." Rhett's chest tightened. "I'm sorry." Leora shrugged, like it was old pain. She wrote, "Why you by me?" There it was. The question he'd been avoiding all night. Rhett stared at the paper, trying to figure out how to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. Finally, he wrote, "Didn't think it was right. How he was treating you." Leora read it. Then she wrote, her handwriting getting smaller, "What you want from me." "Nothing," Rhett said out loud, then felt stupid and wrote it down. "Nothing. You're not my property. You're free." She looked at him like he was lying. "I mean it," Rhett said, frustrated. He wrote, "You can leave if you want. I won't stop you." Leora stared at the words. Then she wrote, "Where I go?" And that was the problem, wasn't it? She had nowhere to go. No family that wanted her. No money. No way to survive on her own in a territory that thought she was cursed. Rhett wrote, "You can stay here. Help with the ranch if you want. Or just rest. Up to you. Ist gut." Leora's hand hovered over the paper. Then she wrote, "Why you are kind." Rhett didn't have a good answer for that either. He wrote, "Trying to be better than my father." She tilted her head, questioning. He shouldn't tell her. It was too much, too soon. But something about those gray eyes made him want to be honest. He wrote, "My father was a violent man, hurt a lot of people. I don't want to be like him." Leora read it carefully. Then she looked up at him, and he saw understanding in her expression. She'd known violence too. She recognized it in him, the shadow of it. She wrote, "You are not him." 3 words. Simple. But they hit Rhett harder than he expected. "How do you know?" he asked, forgetting she couldn't hear. But Leora pointed at the bedroom, then at the loft. Then she pointed at her wrists, where the rope burns were still visible. Finally, she pointed at him and made a gesture, hands open, palms up. "You gave me space. You didn't hurt me." "Yeah," Rhett said quietly. "Yeah, I guess that's something." They sat there in the morning light, 2 broken people with no idea how to fix each other but willing to try anyway. Outside, the wounded mare whinnied. Leora's head turned toward the sound instantly, even though she couldn't have heard it. She looked at Rhett, questioning. He stood and gestured toward the door. "Want to help with the horses?" She didn't wait for him to explain. She was already moving toward the barn, and Rhett found himself smiling despite everything. Maybe this wouldn't be a complete disaster after all. The first week was awkward. Rhett wasn't used to having another person around, and Leora moved through the house like a ghost, silent, careful not to take up space. She helped with chores without being asked, cooked meals that were better than anything he'd managed in years, and spent hours in the barn with the wounded mare. They communicated through notes and gestures. Rhett learned that Leora had grown up on a small farm up north before her parents died, that her brother had sold her off when he couldn't afford to feed her anymore, that she'd been passed between 3 different men before the drunk at the auction, each one treating her worse than the last. She didn't write about the details. She didn't have to. Rhett learned to stomp his boots before entering a room, to make his presence known so he wouldn't startle her. He learned that she woke up screaming sometimes, silent screaming, no sound, just her mouth open and her eyes wild with terror. The first time it happened, he'd rushed down from the loft to find her in the corner of the bedroom, shaking. He'd written, "You're safe, I promise." She hadn't believed him then, but she was starting to. The mare's leg was healing. Leora had some kind of instinct for it. She mixed poultices from plants she found around the property, wrapped the leg with strips of clean cloth, spent hours massaging the damaged muscle. Rhett had seen veterinarians who knew less than this 19-year-old girl who'd never had a day of formal training. "Where'd you learn this?" he asked one afternoon, watching her work. Leora looked up. She couldn't have heard the question, but she seemed to understand. She pointed at her eyes, then made a gesture like she was studying something carefully. I watch. You're good at it, Rhett said. Better than good. She ducked her head, but he thought he saw the corner of her mouth turn up, almost a smile. Progress. Bob. On the 8th day, Sam Porter showed up at the ranch. Rhett was fixing a section of fence when he saw the rider approaching. His shoulders tensed automatically. Company meant questions. Questions meant having to explain Leora. Calloway? Sam called out, dismounting. Got a minute? Busy, Rhett said flatly. I can see that. Sam walked over, thumbs hooked in his belt. Wanted to check in, see how you're managing with the situation. What situation? The girl. Leora. Sam lowered his voice, like she might hear them from inside the house. Town's talking, Rhett. People are worried. Worried about what? About her. About you. About what you're doing out here all alone with a girl young enough to be your daughter. Rhett's hammer came down harder than necessary. She's not my daughter, and I'm not doing anything except giving her a place to stay. I know that, but people talk, and they remember your father. My father's been dead for 15 years, Rhett interrupted. I'm not him. I know that too, Sam said quickly. But the town don't always see it that way. And with her being deaf and strange, she's not strange. She's different. There's a difference. Sam held up his hands. Hey, I'm on your side here. But you should know what they're saying, that she's cursed, that bad things happen around her. Morrison said she predicted that storm last month, the one that took down the Brennan's barn. Said she knew it was coming before the sky even got dark. So she's good at reading weather, Rhett said. That's not cursed. That's smart. Maybe. But people are scared, Rhett, and scared people do stupid things. Rhett set down his hammer and looked Sam square in the eye. Is that a threat? It's a warning, from a friend. Sam glanced at the house. Just be careful, all right? Keep her close. Don't let her go into town. Wasn't planning on it. Good. Sam started back toward his horse, then paused. For what it's worth, I think what you did was decent. Girl deserved better than what she was getting. He swung up into the saddle. Just watch yourself. Rhett watched him ride away, that cold feeling back in his chest. Scared people do stupid things. Yeah, he knew that better than most. That night, after Leora had gone to bed, Rhett sat at the table with a bottle of whiskey he rarely touched. He poured 2 fingers and stared at it, thinking about his father. John Calloway had been a mean drunk who turned meaner when he was sober. Rhett had grown up with bruises that never fully healed, with the sound of his mother crying behind closed doors, with a whole town that looked the other way because John Calloway was respected, feared. When Rhett was 20, his father had gotten into a fight at the saloon and beaten a man nearly to death over a card game. The sheriff had looked the other way, like always. The man had died 3 days later. John Calloway walked free. Rhett had left the ranch that night, swearing he'd never come back. But 2 years later, his mother died, and his father drank himself to death 6 months after that. The ranch fell to Rhett, the only son, the only heir. He'd come back because someone had to, because letting the land go to ruin felt like letting his father win. But sometimes, late at night, he wondered if he'd made a mistake. If staying in this house, on this land, meant he'd always be John Calloway's son first and Rhett Calloway second. A sound made him look up. Leora stood in the bedroom doorway, watching him. She was wearing one of his old shirts as a nightgown. It hung down to her knees, shapeless and huge on her thin frame. Rhett quickly pushed the whiskey bottle away. Can't sleep? He asked, knowing she couldn't hear but needing to say something. Leora walked to the table and sat down across from him. She looked at the bottle, then at his face. Then she wrote on the paper they kept there. You sad? Rhett laughed, bitter. Yeah, I guess I am. She wrote, why? How to explain 15 years of trying to outrun a name? Of living in a house that still smelled like violence even after all this time? He wrote, thinking about my father. He wasn't a good man. Leora read it. Then she wrote, my father was good. I miss him every day. You're lucky, Rhett said, then wrote it down when he realized. She wrote, he died when I was 10. I have only little memories, but they are good memories. Rhett wanted to ask what happened, how her parents died, but it felt like crossing a line. Instead, he wrote, "Your father would be proud of you, the way you are with the horses." Leora's eyes got bright. She looked away quickly, like she was trying not to cry. They sat in silence for a while. Then Leora reached across the table and put her hand over his. It was the first time she'd touched him voluntarily. Her hand was small and warm, and Rhett felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd kept locked up for so long he'd forgotten it was there. He turned his hand over so their palms were touching. They sat like that until the candle burned low, two lonely people finding something like comfort in a world that had given them damn little of it. When Leora finally stood to go back to bed, she wrote one more thing. "Thank you for being kind." Rhett watched her disappear into the bedroom, his hand still warm where hers had been. "You're welcome," he said to the empty room. The morning the mare finally walked without limping, Rhett was mending the chicken coop when he heard Leora's footsteps running across the yard. He looked up to see her waving at him frantically, her face lit up with something he'd never seen before. Pure, uncomplicated joy. She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the barn, practically dragging him. He followed, confused, until they reached the mare's stall. The horse was standing square on all four legs. When Leora clicked her tongue, a sound Rhett hadn't known she could make, the mare walked forward. No limp, no hesitation, just smooth, easy movement. "I'll be damned," Rhett breathed. Leora turned to him, and this time she was definitely smiling. A real smile that reached her eyes and made her look younger than 19. Like maybe she remembered what it felt like to be a kid who hadn't been broken yet. Rhett found himself smiling back. "You did this. All you." She couldn't hear the words, but she seemed to understand. She ducked her head, embarrassed, and went back to stroking the mare's neck. They'd been on the ranch for 3 weeks now, and Rhett was starting to realize that Leora saw things nobody else did. It wasn't just the mare. She'd predicted the last 2 rainstorms before a single cloud appeared, had known when one of the chickens was sick before it showed symptoms, had sensed a rattlesnake near the woodpile that Rhett would have stepped on if she hadn't grabbed his arm. "How do you know these things?" he'd asked her once, writing it out on paper. She'd written back, "I feel them, like pressure in the air." Hard to explain. He'd wanted to push further, but the way she'd hunched her shoulders told him to leave it alone. The town's word for it was cursed. Rhett's word for it was paying attention. But even he had to admit there was something uncanny about the way she moved through the world, like she was tuned to frequencies nobody else could hear. That afternoon, Rhett rode into town for supplies. He hadn't taken Leora. Sam's warning still echoed in his head, and he didn't want to risk it. She'd seemed fine with staying behind, more comfortable with the animals than people anyway. Morrison's general store was busy when he walked in. The usual crowd, ranchers stocking up, women buying fabric, kids begging for penny candy. The conversations died down when Rhett entered. He felt their eyes on him, assessing. "Calloway," Morrison greeted from behind the counter. "What can I do for you?" "Need flour, sugar, coffee, some fabric if you've got it." He paused. "And I'm looking for a slate and chalk." Morrison's eyebrows went up. "A slate? You taking up teaching?" "Something like that." The store owner pulled the items from the shelves while Rhett pretended not to notice the whispering around him. He caught fragments anyway. That girl. Still got her out there. Not natural. He was loading his saddlebags when Clara Henderson approached. She was a handsome woman in her 40s, wife to the rancher who'd told him about the mare. She had kind eyes, but a mouth that didn't smile much. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "might I have a word?" Rhett tensed. "Mrs. Henderson. I wanted to thank you, actually." She glanced around, lowering her voice. "For what you did. Taking that poor girl out of that situation. It was Christian of you." Rhett didn't know what to say to that. "Just seemed right." "It was right," Clara hesitated. "But I also wanted to warn you. There's talk about her, about things that have happened." "What things?" "Do you remember the storm 3 weeks back? The one that tore down the Brennan's barn?" "Yeah. Well, the day before that storm, the girl, Leora, she was in town with that drunk who had her. Mrs. Mackenzie saw her pointing at the sky, getting agitated. The man hit her for making a scene." Clara's jaw tightened. Next day, the storm hit. Worst we've seen in years. She probably felt the pressure changing, Rhett said. Animals do it all the time. That's what I said. But people are scared, Mr. Calloway. They think she brings bad luck. And now that she's with you, she trailed off meaningfully. Now that she's with me, what? They're watching. That's all I'm saying. Be careful. Rhett rode home with Clara's words sitting heavy in his gut. When he got back to the ranch, he found Leora in the garden she'd started near the house. Vegetables he hadn't even known would grow this time of year, arranged in neat rows that somehow looked better than anything he'd managed. She looked up when his shadow fell across her, immediately reading his expression. She stood and brushed dirt from her hands, tilting her head in question. Rhett pulled out the slate and chalk he'd bought. "Thought this might be easier than paper," he said, holding them out. Leora took them carefully, like they were made of glass. She ran her fingers over the smooth surface of the slate, then looked at him with those gray eyes that always seemed to see too much. She wrote in chalk, "Why you look worried." "Town talk," Rhett admitted, then realized she couldn't hear him. He took the slate and wrote, "People in town are scared of you. Think you're unlucky." Leora read it without surprise. She erased his words with her sleeve and wrote, "I know, they always are. Does it bother you?" She considered this, then wrote, "Used to, not anymore. Cannot change what people think." Rhett wanted to argue, to tell her it wasn't fair, but what good would that do? She was right. You couldn't change people's minds once they decided you were something to fear. He wrote, "I don't think you're unlucky." Leora looked at him for a long moment. Then she wrote something that made his chest tight. "You are only one." That night, Rhett couldn't sleep again. He lay in the loft, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the way people had looked at him in town. The same way they'd looked at his father, wary, waiting for violence. Maybe that's all he'd ever be to them. John Calloway's son. The man who'd bought a girl at an auction. The fool living alone with someone the town thought was cursed. From below, he heard movement. Soft footsteps. Then the sound of the front door opening. Rhett climbed down the ladder quietly and looked outside. Leora was sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the night sky. He should leave her alone. Give her space. But something pulled him outside anyway. She sensed him before he reached her, that uncanny awareness again, and turned. In the moonlight, her face looked pale and tired. Rhett sat down beside her, careful to leave space between them. He pointed at the sky, at the stars scattered across the darkness like thrown salt. Leora nodded. She wrote on her slate, "Cannot sleep. Too many thoughts." "Me too," Rhett wrote. They sat in silence, watching the stars. After a while, Leora wrote, "Your mother. What was she like?" Rhett took the slate. His hand hovered over it for a moment before he wrote, "Quiet, sad. She tried to protect me from my father, but she couldn't. I am sorry. It's old pain. Like you said about your parents." Leora erased the slate and wrote carefully, "Old pain still hurts sometimes." "Yeah," Rhett said out loud, forgetting again. "Yeah, it does." She turned to look at him, and he realized how close they were sitting. Close enough that he could see the freckles across her nose, the way her eyelashes cast shadows on her cheeks. She was beautiful. The thought hit him like a punch to the gut. When had that happened? When had she stopped being a frightened girl he'd rescued and become someone he looked for first thing in the morning, someone whose smile made his whole day better? Leora must have seen something in his face because she pulled back slightly, uncertain. Rhett stood quickly. "It's late. We should sleep." She nodded, gathering her blanket, but as she passed him to go inside, she paused and wrote on the slate, "Thank you for sitting with me." "Anytime," Rhett wrote back, and meant it. The next morning brought trouble in the form of Daniel Brennan and his brother Jack. They rode up to the ranch while Rhett was chopping wood, their horses kicking up dust. Rhett set down the axe, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Brennan." "Calloway." Daniel dismounted, Jack following. They were big men, thick through the shoulders from years of ranch work. "We need to talk." "About?" "About your girl, the deaf one." Rhett's jaw tightened. "She's not my girl." "And what about her?" "She cursed our barn," Jack said flatly. 3 weeks ago, she was in town acting crazy, pointing at the sky. Next day, our barn collapses in the storm. Cost us 2 horses and God knows how much in repairs. That's not how curses work, Rhett said. And it's not how weather works either. You calling us liars? Daniel stepped forward. I'm saying you're looking for someone to blame for bad luck, and you picked the easiest target. Bad things happen around her, Jack insisted. Everyone knows it. Morrison's dog died the day after she touched it. Morrison's dog was 15 years old, and Mrs. Mackenzie's milk went sour after the girl looked at her cows. It was summer. Milk goes sour. Daniel held up a hand. Look, we're not here to fight. We're here to warn you. People are talking about doing something about her, running her off, or worse. The world seemed to slow down. Worse. There's talk of a trial, or just handling it themselves. Daniel's expression was grim. I don't agree with it, for the record, but I can't stop it either. So I'm telling you, you need to get her out of here. Send her somewhere else before this gets ugly. She's got nowhere else to go. Then I guess you better figure something out. Daniel swung back into his saddle. I'm sorry, Calloway, but people are scared, and scared people don't think straight. They rode off, leaving Rhett standing in the yard with his hands clenched into fists. He found Leora in the barn, brushing the mare. She looked up when he entered, immediately reading his anger. She set down the brush and picked up her slate. What happened? Rhett didn't want to tell her, didn't want to put that fear back in her eyes. But she deserved to know. He wrote, People in town want you gone. They think you're dangerous. Leora's face went carefully blank. She wrote, I should leave. No, I bring you trouble. I don't care. She looked at him like he was insane. Maybe he was. Maybe buying her in the first place had been insane. But he'd done it, and he didn't regret it, and he'd be damned if he let a bunch of superstitious fools run her off. He wrote, You're staying. Let them come. I'll handle it. You cannot fight whole town, Leora wrote, her hand shaking slightly. Watch me. For the first time since he'd known her, Leora looked angry. She erased the slate hard enough to leave marks and wrote, You will get hurt because of me. I cannot let that happen. Why not? She stared at the question for a long moment. Then she wrote something that made Rhett's heart skip. Because you are only person who ever been kind to me. I will not let them hurt you. Leora, he started. But she dropped the slate and walked past him out of the barn, her shoulders rigid. Rhett stood there holding the slate, staring at her words. The storm came 2 days later. Leora had been agitated all morning, pacing the house, going to the windows and staring at the sky that was perfectly clear and blue. There's no storm coming, Rhett said, watching her. Look, not a cloud anywhere? She couldn't hear him, but she must have understood because she shook her head hard and pointed west. Then she made a gesture like an explosion. You really think it's coming? Rhett asked. She nodded emphatically and grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the barn. She pointed at the horses, then at the house. Rhett understood. You want them inside? In the barn? Another nod. More urgent this time. He looked at the clear sky again, doubtful. But Leora had been right every other time. And something in her expression, pure certainty mixed with fear, convinced him. All right, he said, we'll bring them in. They spent the next hour securing everything they could. Rhett brought the horses into the barn, closed all the shutters on the house, moved anything loose into shelter. Leora worked beside him, moving fast, checking the sky every few minutes. By early afternoon, the sky was still clear. Maybe you were wrong this time, Rhett said, more to himself than to her. But an hour later, the wind picked up, and an hour after that, the western horizon turned black. The storm hit just before sunset. Rhett had seen bad weather before. This was Texas. Storms were part of life. But this was different. The wind came first, strong enough to rattle the whole house, followed by rain so heavy it sounded like gravel hitting the roof. Thunder cracked overhead, so loud Rhett felt it in his chest. He and Leora huddled in the main room, listening to the world tear itself apart outside. She was pressed against the wall, arms wrapped around herself, eyes wide. Rhett moved closer to her. It's all right, he said, knowing she couldn't hear but hoping she'd understand. The house will hold. She looked at him and shook her head. She pointed at the barn. The horses are fine, Rhett assured her. The barn's solid. But Leora's expression said otherwise. She grabbed her slate and wrote with shaking hands. Something wrong. Feel it. Before Rhett could respond, there was a crack like a gunshot. Then a crash that shook the ground. Leora was on her feet instantly, running for the door. Wait! Rhett grabbed her arm. You can't go out there! She wrenched free and threw open the door. The wind nearly ripped it off its hinges. Rain poured in, soaking them both instantly. Through the downpour, Rhett could see what had made the sound. Part of the barn roof had collapsed. Son of a... He didn't finish. Leora was already running across the yard toward the barn, her thin frame nearly blown sideways by the wind. Rhett ran after her, rain pelting his face hard enough to sting. By the time he reached the barn, Leora had already thrown open the door. Inside was chaos. The roof had caved in over two of the stalls, timbers and shingles scattered everywhere. The horses were panicking, screaming and kicking at their stall doors. But Leora wasn't panicking. She moved through the barn like she knew exactly what to do, opening stall doors, herding the horses toward the safe end of the building. The mare saw her and immediately calmed, following her lead. Rhett helped, pulling debris out of the way, checking for injuries. One of the geldings had a cut on his shoulder, but nothing life-threatening. They got all the horses secured in the undamaged stalls, just as another section of roof groaned ominously overhead. "We need to get out!" Rhett shouted, grabbing Leora's hand. They ran back to the house through rain that felt like needles. Once inside, Rhett slammed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. Leora was soaked through, her hair plastered to her face, the oversized shirt she wore clinging to her thin frame. But her eyes were bright with something like triumph. She grabbed her slate. "Horses safe?" "Yeah," Rhett said, still catching his breath. "Thanks to you. How did you know the roof was going to collapse?" "Felt it, like I told you." "That's not normal, Leora." She looked at him, defensive. "I know. I am sorry." "Don't apologize." Rhett pushed wet hair out of his eyes. "You saved them. You saved all of us. If we hadn't brought everything in when you said..." He didn't finish. They both knew what would have happened. Leora wrote, "People will blame me for Storm." "Let them," Rhett said. "We know the truth." But even as he said it, he knew it wouldn't matter. The town would hear about this, about how Leora predicted the storm, about how she'd been agitated all day before it hit. They'd call it proof that she was cursed, that she brought bad luck. They'd come for her. The thought made him cold despite his wet clothes. The storm raged through the night. Rhett and Leora stayed in the main room, too keyed up to sleep. Every time the wind howled or thunder cracked, Leora would flinch. Rhett found himself moving closer to her without thinking, until they were sitting side by side on the floor with their backs against the wall. At some point, Leora's head drooped onto his shoulder. She was shaking, from cold or fear or exhaustion, he wasn't sure. Rhett carefully put his arm around her, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. She leaned into him, and Rhett felt that crack in his chest widen a little more. "I won't let them take you," he said quietly, knowing she couldn't hear but needing to say it anyway. "I don't care what the town thinks. You're staying here." Leora tilted her head to look up at him. In the lamplight, her eyes looked more silver than gray. Then she did something that stopped Rhett's heart. She reached up and touched his face, her cold fingers gentle against his cheek. They stayed like that, frozen, while the storm raged outside and something equally dangerous built between them. Rhett knew he should pull away. She was 19. He was 35. She'd been through hell and probably didn't know what she wanted. This was wrong on about 10 different levels, but he didn't pull away, and neither did she. The moment stretched until Rhett finally broke it, standing up abruptly. "You should sleep," he said roughly. "I'll keep watch." Leora looked confused, maybe hurt, but she nodded and went to the bedroom, glancing back at him once before closing the door. Rhett sat down at the table and put his head in his hands. "You're an idiot," he told himself, "a complete idiot." By morning, the storm had passed, leaving destruction in its wake. Rhett surveyed the damage in the growing light. The barn roof caved in, fence posts down, debris scattered across the yard. It would take weeks to fix everything. But they were alive, the horses were safe, and Leora had known it was coming. He found her in the barn, already assessing the damage. She'd changed into dry clothes, another one of his shirts and the pants he'd altered to fit her. She looked like a kid playing dress-up in her father's clothes. She saw him and picked up her slate, "Can fix it." We can fix it, Rhett corrected. Together. Something shifted in her expression. Then she wrote, "Why you pull away last night?" Rhett's stomach dropped, so she had noticed. He took the slate. Because it wouldn't be right. You've been through too much. You think I do not know my own mind? I think you deserve better than someone like me. Leora stared at what he'd written. Then she erased it and wrote, "You are a good man, Rhett Calloway. Better than you think." Before he could respond, they heard horses approaching, multiple riders. Rhett's hand went instinctively to the rifle he'd brought with him. "Stay here," he said to Leora, forgetting she couldn't hear, but she understood. She shook her head and followed him outside. 6 men on horseback stood in the yard. Rhett recognized most of them, Daniel and Jack Brennan, Sam Porter, Morrison, and 2 others from town. They looked grim. "Calloway," Daniel said, "we need to talk about last night." "What about it?" "The storm. It hit your ranch hardest. Your barn's destroyed, but nobody else lost anything. Just some branches down, minor flooding." "So?" "So it's like the storm came straight for you," Jack said. "Like someone called it here." Rhett felt Leora tense beside him. "That's insane." "Is it?" Morrison spoke up. "The girl predicted it, didn't she? Was acting strange all day before it hit?" "She felt the pressure changing. She brought it here," Jack interrupted. "She's cursed, Calloway. Everyone knows it, and as long as she's here, bad things are going to keep happening." "Get off my land," Rhett said quietly. "We're trying to help you," Sam said. "The town's talking about taking action. We came here first to warn you." "I said get off my land." The men exchanged glances. Then Daniel said, "We're giving you 1 week. Get rid of her, or we'll do it for you." "You'll have to go through me." "Don't be stupid," Morrison said. "You can't fight all of us. Watch me." The standoff stretched. Finally, Daniel shook his head. 1 week, Calloway. Don't make us come back." They rode off, leaving Rhett and Leora standing in the yard. Leora's hand found his. She was shaking again. Rhett squeezed her fingers. "They're not taking you," he said. "I promise." She pulled out her slate with her free hand. "Cannot keep that promise. Too dangerous." "Don't care." "Why?" she wrote, her hand shaking so badly the letters were barely readable. "Why you risk everything for me?" Rhett looked at her. At this girl who'd survived hell and come out still trying to save everyone around her, who calmed horses with a touch and knew storms before they arrived, who made his empty house feel like a home for the first time in 15 years. He took the slate and wrote carefully, "Because losing you would be worse." Leora read it. Then she looked up at him with those storm-gray eyes, and Rhett saw his own feelings reflected back. Fear and hope tangled up together, neither one quite winning. She wrote, "What we do now?" Rhett looked at the damaged barn, at the clear sky that had been so violent just hours before, at the road where the men had disappeared. "We fix the barn," he said. "We stay. And we wait." 1 week. They had 1 week before the town came for her. It would have to be enough. They worked on the barn for 3 days straight, barely stopping to eat or sleep. Rhett handled the heavy lifting, hauling away broken timbers, shimming up the collapsed section with temporary supports. Leora worked beside him, measuring, holding boards steady, anticipating what he needed before he asked for it. It should have been miserable work. The October sun was still hot enough to cook a man, and every muscle in Rhett's body screamed by the end of each day. But working alongside Leora felt different than working alone. She'd appear with water exactly when his throat was dust dry. She'd steady a board right before he needed both hands free. They moved around each other like they'd been doing this for years instead of days. On the 4th morning, Clara Henderson rode up while they were replacing shingles. Rhett climbed down from the barn roof, wiping sweat from his face. "Mrs. Henderson," Clara dismounted, glancing at Leora, who'd frozen on the roof, watching them. "Mr. Calloway, I came to warn you." "About?" "The town meeting tomorrow night. They're calling it to discuss the storm damage." She lowered her voice. "And to discuss her. What they're going to do about her." Rhett's jaw tightened. "They can discuss all they want, won't change anything." Thomas Brennan lost 3 head of cattle in the flooding. The Porter's well went dry overnight. People are scared and they're looking for someone to blame. Clara paused. "There's talk of burning her out. Some of the younger men are getting liquored up, saying things. Daniel and Sam are trying to keep it peaceful, but I don't know if they can." "When's this meeting?" "Tomorrow. At sunset, at the church. Claire's expression softened. For what it's worth, I don't think she's cursed. I think she's just different, and people don't like different. But what I think doesn't matter much when there's 20 angry men with torches. After Clara left, Rhett climbed back up to the roof where Leora was waiting. She'd been watching them talk, and her face had that careful blankness that meant she was terrified, but trying not to show it. He sat down beside her and pulled out the slate they kept in his work belt now. He wrote, "Town meeting tomorrow night. About you." Leora took the slate and wrote, "I leave tonight before they come." "No, you cannot stop them all, Rhett." Her handwriting was getting messier, the chalk pressed hard enough to scratch. "I will not watch you die for me. I'm not going to die. You do not know that." She erased frantically and wrote, "Please, let me go. I have survived before. I will survive again." Rhett looked at her, really looked at her. In the months since the auction, she'd put on a little weight. Her face had lost that hollowed-out look. The fear in her eyes had softened into something closer to caution. She was starting to heal, and now the world wanted to tear her down again. He took the slate. "If you leave, where will you go?" She didn't answer for a long moment. Then she wrote, "Does not matter. It matters to me." Why? The question again. The one she kept asking, like she couldn't believe his answers. Rhett stared at the word. He could write something safe, something that wouldn't scare her off. But he was tired of being safe, tired of pretending he didn't feel what he felt. He wrote, "Because I care about you, more than I should." Leora's eyes went wide. She read it twice, then looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "I am 19, she wrote. "You are 35. "I know. Too old for you. That is not—" She stopped, frustrated, erased it all. "People will say things. Let them. You barely know me. I know enough." They stared at each other across the slate, the sun beating down on them, the half-repaired barn creaking beneath their feet. Rhett's heart was hammering so hard he thought she might be able to feel it. Then Leora did something that surprised him. She reached over and took the chalk from his hand. She wrote slowly, carefully, "I care about you too. That is why I must leave, to keep you safe." "You're not leaving," Rhett said out loud, knowing she couldn't hear but needing to say it anyway. "We'll figure this out together." Leora looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once and went back to nailing shingles, but her hands were shaking. That night, Rhett couldn't sleep. He lay in the loft, staring at the ceiling, thinking about torch-carrying men and Clara's warning. They'd give him until the meeting tomorrow, maybe. But after that, all bets were off. He heard Leora moving around downstairs and climbed down to find her sitting at the table, the lantern burning low, writing something on paper. She looked up when she heard him, quickly covering what she'd written. Rhett gestured at the paper. "What's that?" She hesitated, then moved her hand. The paper was covered in words, neat handwriting, much better than her usual scrawl on the slate. It took Rhett a moment to realize what he was reading. It was a letter. To him. "Dear Rhett," it began. "I am not good with words, especially English words that I learned late. But I want you to know something before I go. You saved my life. Not just at the auction. Every day since then you have shown me that there are still good people in this world. I was starting to forget that. You remind me to hope. That is a gift I cannot repay. Please do not follow me when I leave. Please do not try to find me. Live your life and be happy. You deserve happiness more than anyone I have ever known. Thank you for everything. Leora." Rhett read it twice, something hot and angry building in his chest. He grabbed the slate and wrote, "You're planning to run." Leora wouldn't meet his eyes. She nodded. "When?" "Tonight. After you sleep. I'm not sleeping." She looked up at him then, and there were tears on her face. Silent tears that broke something in Rhett's chest. She grabbed the slate and wrote, "I cannot stay and watch them hurt you. I cannot." "They won't hurt me," Rhett said, then wrote it down when he remembered. "I can handle myself." Against 20 men with torches? She was crying harder now, the tears dripping onto the slate and smearing the chalk. "You think you are strong enough, but you are not. Nobody is." "Then we'll both leave. Go somewhere else. Start over." Leora shook her head violently. "This is your home, your land. I will not take that from you. It's just land." "It is your father's land, your mother's, your family's." Her handwriting was barely legible now. You stay. I go. That is only way. Rhett wanted to argue, but what could he say? She was right about one thing. He couldn't fight off the whole town. And if they came with torches and guns, someone was going to get hurt, maybe killed. But the thought of Leora out there alone, running again, terrified and hunted, that was worse than any beating he could take. He wrote, "What if I don't want you to go?" "Then you are a fool," she wrote back. But her hand was gentle when she touched his arm. Sweet fool, but still fool. "Yeah," Rhett said quietly. "Probably." They sat there at the table, not touching, but close enough that Rhett could feel the warmth of her. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance. The lantern flame flickered. Finally, Leora picked up the chalk again. "Will you do something for me? Anything," she wrote. "Teach me to say your name, out loud." Rhett's throat went tight. She'd never asked to speak before. He'd figured she either couldn't or wouldn't, and he'd never pushed. He wrote, "Why? Because I want to. Before I leave, I want to say it once." Rhett stared at the words, then nodded. He wrote, "Rhett. R-E-T. Like R-E-T with an H." Leora studied his mouth as he said it out loud. Then she tried, her voice rusty and uncertain. "R-R-Et." It was the first time he'd heard her voice. It was higher than he expected, with a strange cadence that came from never hearing herself speak. But it was hers, and hearing his name in that voice did something to him he couldn't explain. "Again," he said, gesturing, "Rhett." Clearer this time. "Rhett." "That's it," Rhett said, smiling despite everything. "Perfect." Leora smiled back, tentative, and Rhett realized they were sitting closer than before, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her gray eyes, close enough that when she leaned forward slightly, he could smell the lavender soap she'd started using. He should pull back. This was a bad idea for about 100 reasons, but he didn't pull back. And when Leora's hand came up to touch his face again, the same gesture from the night of the storm, Rhett let her. Her palm was warm against his cheek, her fingers trembling slightly. "Leora," he said, and she must have read her name on his lips because something shifted in her expression. Then she leaned in and kissed him. It was awkward and uncertain, like she wasn't quite sure what she was doing. Rhett froze, his brain short-circuiting. This was wrong. She was too young, too vulnerable, too... But then she pulled back, looking terrified, and Rhett realized he'd just sat there like a statue instead of responding. "No, wait," he started, but she was already standing up, backing away, her face flushed with embarrassment. She grabbed her slate. "I am sorry. I should not have..." Rhett stood and took the slate from her hands. He set it down on the table. Then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he cupped her face in his hands. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said, knowing she couldn't hear but hoping she'd understand. Then he kissed her properly. This time she didn't freeze. Her hands came up to grip his shirt, and she kissed him back with a kind of desperate intensity that made Rhett's head spin. She tasted like the tea she'd been drinking, and when she made a small sound in the back of her throat, Rhett felt it all the way to his bones. They broke apart finally, both breathing hard. Leora's eyes were wide, searching his face for something. Regret, maybe, or confirmation that this was real. Rhett touched his forehead to hers, trying to get his heart under control. "You're not leaving," he said quietly. "Understand? We're facing this together." He pulled back enough to write on the slate, "You stay. We fight together." Leora read it, then wrote, "They will hurt you because of me. Don't care. I care." Her handwriting was fierce now. "You are most important thing in my life. I will not let them destroy you. Then don't leave, because losing you would destroy me worse than anything they could do." She stared at what he'd written. Then she dropped the chalk and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. Rhett held her, feeling her shake against him, from fear or relief or both, he wasn't sure. "We'll figure it out," he said into her hair. "I promise." But even as he said it, he wondered if it was a promise he could keep. The next day crawled by with the speed of cold molasses. Rhett tried to work on the barn, but his mind kept drifting to the town meeting that evening. What would they decide? Would they come tonight? Or give him a few more days? Would it matter either way? Around noon, Sam Porter rode up alone. Rhett met him in the yard, rifle in hand. "Easy," Sam said, holding up his hands. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "Then why are you here?" "To give you a chance to avoid what's coming." Sam dismounted, looking tired. "The meeting's at sunset. I'm guessing they'll vote to run her off, maybe burn you out if you resist. Daniel and I are trying to keep it civilized, but—" He shrugged. "People are angry, Rhett. Scared, and scared people do stupid things." "You've mentioned that before." "Because it's still true." Sam glanced at the house. "Is she inside?" "Yeah." "Can I talk to her?" Rhett's grip tightened on the rifle. "Why?" "Because maybe if she hears it from someone who's trying to help, she'll understand that leaving is the smart choice." "She can't hear anything, Sam, and even if she could, she's not leaving." "Rhett." "She's not leaving," Rhett repeated. "This is her home now, and I'm not letting a bunch of superstitious idiots run her off my land." Sam sighed. "Then you're signing both your death warrants." "Maybe, or maybe I'm making a stand for something that actually matters." They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Sam shook his head. "I can't protect you if you're not willing to compromise." "I'm not asking you to protect me." "You should be, because what's coming tonight—" Sam stopped, jaw working. "Just think about it, all right? You've got until sunset." After Sam left, Rhett found Leora in the barn with the horses. She was brushing the mare, her movements slow and methodical. She looked up when he approached, and he could see the question in her eyes. He wrote on the slate, "Meeting is tonight. They'll probably come after." Leora nodded like she'd expected this. She set down the brush and wrote, "I can leave now, before dark. They will not follow if I am already gone." "No." "Rhett." She stopped, frustrated, and said his name out loud instead. "Rhett." It was clearer than last night, more certain. Hearing it did the same thing to his heart. "I'm not changing my mind," he said. She grabbed the slate. "Then I am not leaving." "Good. Even if they come with torches?" "Especially then." They looked at each other across the stall, and Rhett saw his own stubbornness reflected back at him. Neither of them was backing down. "All right then," Rhett said, writing it down. "We make a stand." The sun was setting when they heard the horses. Rhett had been expecting it, but the reality still made his stomach drop. He looked out the window and counted at least 15 riders, maybe more. They carried torches even though it wasn't full dark yet, the flames bright against the purple sky. "Christ," Rhett muttered. Leora appeared beside him, looking out. Her face had gone pale, but her jaw was set. She picked up her slate. "I can still go out. Talk to them." "You can't talk to them." "I can try." Her handwriting was shaking but determined. "Maybe they will listen." "They won't." "Then what we do?" Rhett grabbed his rifle from above the door and checked that it was loaded. Then he wrote, "I go out. You stay inside. Lock the door." Leora shook her head violently. "No, I go with you. Too dangerous. I am reason they are here. I should face them." Before Rhett could argue, someone banged on the door. "Calloway, we know you're in there. Come out." Rhett recognized Jack Brennan's voice. He took a breath, trying to steady himself. Then he looked at Leora and wrote, "Stay behind me. Don't do anything stupid." She wrote back, "Same to you." Despite everything, Rhett almost smiled. He opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. Leora followed, and he felt her press close to his back. The riders had formed a semicircle around the house, torches held high. Rhett recognized most of them: Morrison, the Brennan brothers, Sam, and several others from town. Some of the younger men looked drunk, swaying in their saddles. Daniel Brennan spoke first. "Calloway, we gave you a week. Time's up." "The week's not over yet," Rhett said evenly. "Near enough. The town voted. The girl has to go." "She's staying." "That's not your choice to make," Jack said. "She's a danger to everyone. The storm proved it." "The storm was weather, nothing more." "She predicted it," someone shouted from the back. "Knew it was coming before there was a cloud in the sky. That ain't natural." "She's got good instincts," Rhett shot back. "That's all." "Morrison's dog died after she touched it." "The dog was old." "3 of my cattle drowned in the flooding. That's not her fault." The shouts overlapped, growing louder. Rhett felt Leora's hand grip the back of his shirt, holding on tight. Daniel held up his hand for quiet. Look, Calloway, we don't want trouble. Just send the girl out and this ends peacefully. No. Don't be stupid. You can't win this. Don't have to win. Just have to not lose. Sam Porter urged his horse forward. Rhett, please, think about what you're doing. Is she really worth dying for? Rhett felt Leora tense behind him. He could imagine what she was thinking, that she wasn't worth it, that she should give herself up, that his life mattered more than hers. But she was wrong. Yeah, Rhett said quietly. She is. The crowd erupted in angry shouts. Someone threw something, a rock maybe, that clattered against the porch. Leora flinched. Last chance, Calloway, Jack yelled. Send her out, or we're coming in. Rhett raised the rifle. First man who tries gets shot. The shouting died down. The crowd exchanged glances, uncertain. They'd come expecting Rhett to cave, to see reason. They hadn't expected him to actually fight back. You'd kill your neighbors over some cursed girl? Morrison asked, incredulous. She's not cursed, Rhett said. She's just different, and you're all so damn scared of different you can't see straight. She brings bad luck. She saved those horses. Rhett gestured toward the barn. When the roof collapsed, she got them out, saved every single one. If she's cursed, why would she do that? Because, Morrison started, then stopped, uncertain. Rhett pressed on, the words spilling out now. You want to know what I think? I think you're looking for someone to blame for your problems. It's easier than admitting that sometimes bad things just happen. The storm was weather. The drought that killed your well, Sam, that was weather too. Morrison, your dog was 15 years old. It was time. She's unnatural, someone muttered. No, she's just better at paying attention than the rest of us. Rhett lowered the rifle slightly, looking at each of them in turn. I know what it's like to be judged for things you can't control. My whole life, people looked at me and saw my father. Saw violence and cruelty and anger. You all remember John Calloway. You remember what he did. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. I spent 15 years trying to prove I wasn't him, Rhett continued. 15 years working this land, keeping to myself, not causing trouble. And you know what? It didn't matter, because you still see him when you look at me. You still expect me to explode the way he did. That's not, Sam started. It is true, Rhett interrupted. And I'm done caring about it. Because the only person who's ever looked at me and not seen my father is standing right behind me. She sees me, just me. And that's worth more than all your approval combined. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Leora's grip on his shirt tightened, and Rhett could feel her shaking. Then Daniel Brennan spoke, his voice rough. You really care about her that much? Yeah, Rhett said simply. I do. Even though she can't hear you, can't talk right? Even though the whole town thinks she's cursed? Especially because of all that. Rhett looked at Daniel. She's had a harder life than any of us can imagine. Been treated like property, beaten, sold like livestock. And she's still standing, still trying, still kind enough to save horses that don't even belong to her. He paused. That's not cursed. That's strength. He turned slightly so he could see Leora without losing sight of the crowd. Her face was wet with tears, and when their eyes met, he saw something in her expression that made his chest ache. So yeah, Rhett said, turning back to the crowd. She's worth fighting for. She's worth dying for, if that's what it comes to. And if you want her, you're going through me first. The crowd was silent now. Even the drunk ones had sobered up, staring at Rhett like they'd never seen him before. Finally, Clara Henderson's voice rang out from the back. I think we should leave them alone. Heads turned. Clara nudged her horse forward, looking at the men around her. Mr. Calloway's right. We've been looking for someone to blame instead of accepting that sometimes life is just hard. The girl hasn't hurt anyone. She's helped, if anything. And if Rhett wants to give her a home, that's his business, not ours. But the storm, someone started, was a storm, Clara said firmly. Nothing more. And I'm ashamed it took Rhett Calloway standing up to us with a rifle to make us see it. A few people nodded. Morrison looked uncomfortable. The Brennan brothers exchanged glances. Sam Porter finally spoke. Clara's right. We came here angry, but that doesn't make us right. He looked at Rhett. I'm sorry. For all of this. One by one, the torches started lowering. The younger men who'd been shouting looked ashamed now, staring at their saddles. Jack Brennan was the last to back down. "This isn't over, Calloway. You keep her here, and bad things happen. That's on you." "I'll take that chance," Rhett said. The crowd turned and rode away, their torches fading into the darkness. Rhett stood there on the porch, rifle still in hand, until the last one disappeared over the rise. Then his legs nearly gave out. He sat down hard on the porch steps, setting the rifle aside with shaking hands. Leora appeared beside him, her slate already out. "You were amazing." "I was terrified," Rhett admitted, forgetting she couldn't hear. He took the slate. "Thought they were going to kill us both. Me too." She paused, then wrote, "What you said about me. Did you mean it?" "Every word." Leora's face crumpled. She set down the slate and threw her arms around him, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a shifting world. Rhett held her back, feeling her tears soak into his shirt. "You're safe," he said into her hair. "We're both safe." They sat there on the porch steps as full dark fell, holding each other, while the Texas night settled around them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The horses nickered softly in the barn. After a long while, Leora pulled back and picked up her slate. "I love you." The words hit Rhett like a physical blow. He stared at them, his heart hammering. She wrote, "I know it is too soon. I know you maybe do not feel same, but I needed to say it. After tonight, after what you did." Rhett took the slate with trembling hands. He erased her words and wrote, "I love you too." When she read it, her smile was like sunrise, bright and new and full of hope. He kissed her there on the porch steps, with the stars watching and the night wind blowing warm across the plains. When they finally went inside, Leora didn't go to the bedroom alone. She climbed the ladder to the loft and Rhett followed. They lay down together in the narrow space, fully clothed, just holding each other. Rhett could feel her heartbeat against his chest, steady and strong. "Thank you," Leora whispered in her rough, uncertain voice. "Thank you for fighting for me." Rhett pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Always," he said, knowing she couldn't hear but meaning it anyway. "Always." Outside, the night deepened, and for the first time since his mother died, Rhett Calloway felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Rhett woke to frost on the windows and Leora's hand in his. November had arrived while they weren't paying attention, bringing cold mornings and the kind of quiet that settled deep into a person's bones. He lay there in the loft, watching her sleep, her dark hair spread across the pillow they'd started sharing, her face peaceful in a way it never was when she was awake. 2 weeks had passed since the night the town came for her. 2 weeks of waiting for the other shoe to drop, for angry men to return with more torches and less conscience. But nobody came. The ranch settled back into its rhythm, work at dawn, meals at midday, evenings spent by the fire learning to talk to each other in the dozens of small ways that had nothing to do with words. Leora's eyes opened, gray as winter sky. When she saw him watching, she smiled and touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw like she was memorizing it. "Morning?" Rhett said, knowing she couldn't hear but saying it anyway because some things needed to be said. She pulled his hand to her lips and kissed his knuckles, then sat up and reached for her slate. The loft was cramped for 2 people, but neither of them had suggested going back to separate sleeping arrangements. Rhett figured that said something about where they were headed, even if neither of them had worked up the courage to talk about it directly. Leora wrote, "Need to check the mare. She was favoring right foreleg yesterday. I didn't notice that. You were fixing fence." "I was watching her." She paused, then added, "Always watching." That was the truth. Leora saw everything, the slight hitch in a horse's gait, the way clouds formed patterns hours before rain, the way Rhett's shoulders tensed when he was worried about money. She paid attention to the world with an intensity most people couldn't manage, probably because she'd had to. When you couldn't hear danger coming, you learned to see it instead. They climbed down from the loft, and Rhett started coffee, while Leora pulled on the heavy coat he'd bought her in town last week. She'd protested the expense. Everything was a protest with her when it came to spending money on herself, but one look at her shivering in his 2 big shirts had convinced him. The coat was brown wool, plain but warm, and it actually fit her. She caught him staring and raised her eyebrows in question. "You look good," he said, then wrote it on the slate. "You look good in that coat." She rolled her eyes but smiled. You just like that I stopped stealing your shirts. I like you in my shirts too. That made her blush, which Rhett had discovered he enjoyed doing. She'd spent so long being invisible, being nothing, that making her feel seen, really seen, felt like the most important thing he'd ever done. They went to the barn together, their breath making clouds in the cold air. The mare was indeed favoring her right foreleg, though Rhett still couldn't see what Leora had noticed. She knelt in the stall and ran her hands down the horse's leg, feeling for heat or swelling. After a moment, she looked up at Rhett and pointed to a spot just above the hoof. He knelt beside her, and she guided his hand to the same spot. There, a slight warmth that didn't belong, a barely perceptible swelling. "Stone bruise, maybe?" Rhett said. Leora nodded and wrote on her slate, "Need to soak it. Keep weight off for a few days." They spent the morning setting up a soaking bucket and making the mare comfortable. Leora mixed something from the herbs she'd been collecting and drying. Rhett had no idea what half of them were, but they seemed to work. The mare stood patient while Leora wrapped the leg and whispered to her in that rough voice she rarely used. "You're better at this than any vet I've ever met," Rhett said, writing it down when she finished. "My father teach me," she wrote back, "before he die. He say animals know when you care. They trust you if you trust them." He was right. He was right about many things. Her expression went distant. "I wish he meet you. He would like you. Because I'm so charming." That got a smile. "Because you are kind. He always say kindness is most important thing." Rhett thought about his own father, about the opposite of kindness. "I wish I'd met him too," he said, writing it carefully. "Your father raised a good daughter." Leora's eyes got bright. She turned away quickly, pretending to check the mare's water bucket, but Rhett saw her wipe at her face. He gave her space, understanding that some grief needed privacy even when you weren't alone. That afternoon, Clara Henderson showed up with her daughter Emma, a girl of about 12 with her mother's kind eyes. Rhett tensed automatically when he saw them riding up. Visitors still made him nervous, but Clara waved in greeting. "Don't worry," she called. "We come in peace." Leora had appeared beside Rhett, watching the riders warily. He touched her arm and wrote, "Clara, the woman who spoke up for us. She's friendly." Leora nodded, but didn't relax. Clara dismounted, helping Emma down. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I wanted to bring you some things." She held up a basket. "Fresh bread, some preserves, and Emma's been nagging me about meeting Leora ever since the town meeting." Emma looked embarrassed. "Ma, you promised you wouldn't say it like that." "Well, it's true," Clara smiled at Leora, speaking slowly and making sure Leora could see her face. "Hello, Leora. My name is Clara. This is my daughter, Emma." Leora's eyes flicked between them, uncertain. She signed something, actual hand signs that Rhett didn't recognize. Emma's face lit up. "You know sign language?" Leora nodded, surprised, and signed something else. "A little," Emma said, her own hands moving in response. "My cousin is deaf. She taught me some. Not much, but maybe enough to talk?" Rhett watched in amazement as the two of them started a halting conversation in signs. Leora's face transformed, the careful blankness falling away, replaced by something like joy. She was talking, really talking, to someone who understood. Clara moved to stand beside Rhett, watching them. Emma's been practicing all week. She thought Leora might be lonely, not being able to communicate properly. "That was kind of her," Rhett said, his throat tight. "Emma's like that, gets it from her father." Clara paused. "I also wanted to apologize properly. For the town. For not speaking up sooner. You spoke up when it mattered. Barely, and only after you shamed us all into seeing sense." She looked at him. "What you said that night, about being judged for your father's actions, that hit home for a lot of folks. Made us think. I didn't say it to make anyone feel bad." "I know. You said it because it was true." Clara gestured at Leora. "How is she doing?" "Really?" Rhett watched Leora signing with Emma, her hands moving fast now, her face animated. "Better. She's healing. Slowly." "And you?" The question caught him off guard. "What about me? Are you healing too?" Clara's expression was knowing. "You've been alone out here a long time, Rhett, punishing yourself for being John Calloway's son. But maybe it's time to stop." Rhett didn't know what to say to that. Clara patted his arm. She's good for you. Anyone can see it. Don't let what people think stop you from being happy. Before Rhett could respond, Emma called out, Mr. Calloway, Leora wants to know if you know any sign language. No, Rhett admitted. We've been using slates and paper. Emma signed something to Leora, who signed back. Emma translated. She says she wants to teach you, if you want to learn. Yeah, Rhett said, looking at Leora. Yeah, I'd like that. After Clara and Emma left, Leora was different, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. She grabbed Rhett's hand and pulled him to the table, practically bouncing with excitement. She wrote on her slate, Emma teach me signs for words I forget, and she says she come back next week to practice more. Rhett smiled at her enthusiasm. That's good. I'm glad you have a friend. She is nice. Her mother, too. Leora paused, then wrote, Do you really want to learn sign language? Of course. Why wouldn't I? It is hard. Takes long time. I don't care. I want to talk to you properly. Something shifted in Leora's expression. She set down the slate and took both his hands, placing them in front of her. Then she carefully shaped his fingers into different positions, her touch gentle and patient. This, she said out loud, her voice rough around the edges. This means home. She moved his hands into a different shape. This means safe. Another shape. This means love. Rhett memorized each one, watching her face as she taught him. When she'd shown him about a dozen signs, she used them in sequence, her own hands moving. Home, safe, love, you. Rhett's chest felt too tight. He copied the signs back to her, clumsy and uncertain. Love, you, too. Leora's smile was everything. The first snow came a week later, light and unexpected. Rhett woke to find Leora standing at the loft window watching the flakes fall. She turned when she felt him move, her face full of wonder. Beautiful, she said out loud, the word mangled but recognizable. Yeah, Rhett agreed, pulling the blanket around both of them. Beautiful. They watched the snow together, and Rhett realized that this was what happiness felt like. Not the loud, dramatic kind, just quiet contentment, standing with someone you loved, watching snow fall, knowing you were exactly where you were supposed to be. The happiness didn't last. 2 days after the first snow, Rhett rode into town for supplies and came back to find Leora pale and shaking, sitting at the kitchen table with her slate clutched in her hands. What's wrong? He asked. Then signed it, one of the phrases she'd taught him. She wrote with trembling hands, Man came, looking for me. Ice flooded Rhett's veins. What man? One who had me before the auction. He want me back. Did he hurt you? Leora shook her head. I hide in barn. He knock on door, but I not answer. He leave message. She pushed a piece of paper across the table. Rhett picked it up. The handwriting was crude but readable. I know you're here. I'm coming back for what's mine. You owe me money. Son of a bitch, Rhett muttered. He wrote on the slate, He's not taking you. I won't let him. He say I owe him money, for food, for keeping me alive. You don't owe him anything. He will come back, Leora wrote, her handwriting getting messier. He will bring law, maybe. Say I am his property, that you steal me. Rhett wanted to put his fist through the wall. Instead, he wrote, You are not property. You never were. Law might not see it that way. She was right, and they both knew it. Texas law was muddy on the question of ownership, especially when it came to people who'd been sold or traded like livestock. If the man had papers saying he'd paid for her, he might have a legal claim. The thought made Rhett sick. He wrote, We'll figure it out. Together. Leora nodded, but didn't look convinced. That night, Rhett barely slept. He kept his rifle close and jumped at every sound. Beside him, Leora lay rigid, pretending to sleep but fooling nobody. Around midnight, she turned to him and spelled out signs he'd taught her. Safe? Here? Yes, Rhett said, signing it back. Always safe here. But even as he said it, he wondered if it was true. The man came back 3 days later with the sheriff. Rhett saw them riding up and felt his stomach drop. He was in the yard, and Leora was in the house. He caught her eye through the window and signed, Stay, inside. She nodded, but he could see the fear on her face. Sheriff Tom Crawford was a weathered man in his 50s, fair but not particularly imaginative. He'd never given Rhett trouble before, but he'd also never been on Rhett's side either. The man riding beside him was the drunk from the auction, heavier now, meaner looking in the daylight. "Calloway," Sheriff Crawford said, tipping his hat. "We've got a situation." "What situation?" The drunk spoke up. "You stole my property. That girl you got in there, I paid for her, got papers to prove it, and you took her without paying me back. I paid you $20 for her. That was for temporary keeping, not permanent. The girl's still mine until her debt is paid." "What debt?" Rhett demanded. "Food, shelter, clothes. 3 years' worth. Comes to about $200. "That's bullshit." "Watch your mouth, Calloway," Sheriff Crawford warned. "Let's keep this civil. Mr. Hansen here says he's got paperwork showing the girl was in his custody. You got paperwork saying otherwise?" Rhett's mouth went dry. "I've got a bill of sale. He sold her to me for $20. "Temporary sale," Hansen corrected. "Says so right on the paper." "It doesn't say that." "Then show me the paper," Crawford said. Rhett's mind raced. Where had he put that receipt? He'd gotten one, he was sure of it. But that was 2 months ago, and he'd been so focused on Leora he hadn't thought about documentation. "It's in the house," Rhett said. "I'll get it." "We'll wait here," Crawford said, but his tone suggested he didn't think Rhett would find anything. Rhett went inside, his heart pounding. Leora met him at the door, her face white. "They want papers," Rhett said, signing as he spoke. "The receipt from when I bought you." She pointed at his desk. Together they tore through drawers, looking for the crumpled piece of paper Hansen had given him. Rhett's hands were shaking so badly he could barely grip anything. Come on, he muttered. "It's got to be here." But it wasn't. After 10 minutes of searching, they had to accept it. Either Rhett had lost it, or it had never existed in the first place. "Shit," Rhett said. Leora grabbed her slate. "I go with him. No choice. No. He has law on his side. You cannot fight that. Watch me." He went back outside, his hands empty. Crawford's expression said he'd expected this. "Couldn't find it?" the sheriff asked. "It's here somewhere. I just need more time." "Time's up, Calloway. Mr. Hansen here has documentation. You don't. That means the girl goes with him until you can prove ownership." "She's not going anywhere. That's not your call." Crawford's hand moved to his gun belt. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "She's not property," Rhett's voice cracked. "You can't just hand her over like she's a horse or a piece of furniture." "Law says I can," Crawford said, but he looked uncomfortable. "Look, if you really did buy her fair and square, get the documentation and we'll sort this out. But until then, she stays here," Rhett interrupted. "On my land, under my protection." Hansen spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Your protection don't mean shit. She's coming with me. Over my dead body." "That can be arranged," Hansen said, his hand moving to his own gun. The world seemed to slow down. Rhett was aware of every detail, the cold wind on his face, the creak of Crawford's saddle, the door opening behind him as Leora came out onto the porch. "Don't," Rhett said to her without turning around. "Stay inside." But Leora walked past him, her chin up, her steps deliberate. She moved to stand between Rhett and the two mounted men. Then she signed something, quick and sharp, her hands moving with precision. "What's she saying?" Crawford asked, confused. Emma had taught Leora more than just casual conversation. She'd taught her how to argue, how to make herself understood when it mattered. Leora signed again, slower this time, and Rhett translated haltingly. "She says she wasn't sold. She was freed. She says the $20 was payment for her freedom, not temporary custody." "That's a lie," Hansen snarled. "The girl can't even talk proper. How's she going to make legal claims?" Leora's hands moved again, faster, angrier. Rhett struggled to keep up. "She says you beat her, starved her, treated her like an animal. She says she'd rather die than go back with you." "Too bad what she wants," Hansen said. "She's mine." "No," the voice came from behind them. Rhett turned to see Sam Porter riding up with Clara Henderson and, surprisingly, Emma. The girl was translating Leora's signs for her mother. "What's going on here?" Sam asked. Crawford explained the situation. Sam listened, his expression darkening. "That's not how I remember it," Sam said when the sheriff finished. "I was at the auction. Hansen here sold the girl outright. $20, no conditions mentioned." "You sure about that?" Crawford asked. "Positive. Morrison was there too. So were the Brennan brothers. We can all testify to what was said." Hanson's face went red. You're lying to protect Calloway. I'm telling the truth, Sam said firmly. And if you want to call me a liar, we can settle that however you'd like. The threat hung in the air. Crawford looked between them, calculating. Even if that's true, the sheriff said slowly, buying a person is still legally questionable. Could be argued that the sale wasn't valid in the first place. Then let's go to a judge, Clara said. Let them sort it out. But until then, the girl stays with Rhett. She's safe there, she's being treated well, and she wants to stay. That should count for something. Crawford chewed on that for a moment. Finally, he nodded. All right, we'll take this to Judge Markham in Austin. He can make the final call. But Hanson, if I find out you were lying about those papers, you'll be the one in trouble. Understood? Hanson looked like he wanted to argue, but Crawford's expression brooked no argument. Fine, he spat. But this isn't over. They rode off, leaving Rhett, Leora, Sam, and Clara in the yard. Rhett turned to Sam. Thank you. I don't know how to... Don't, Sam said. I should have spoken up sooner. At the auction, after it. I knew what was happening wasn't right, but I didn't want to get involved. He looked ashamed. That was wrong of me. You spoke up now. That's what matters. After Sam and Clara left, Rhett and Leora went inside. She was shaking again, and Rhett pulled her into his arms. We'll go to Austin, he said, signing as he spoke. We'll talk to the judge. We'll figure this out. Leora signed back. What if Judge says I must go back? Then we run. We'll go somewhere else. Start over. You would leave your land? For me? In a heartbeat. She pulled back to look at him, searching his face. Then she signed, I love you. I love you too, Rhett said, and kissed her. They spent the next week preparing for the trip to Austin. It was a 3-day ride, and they'd need supplies. Rhett also needed to figure out what to do with the ranch while they were gone. The horses, the chickens, the place itself. Sam offered to check on things while they were away. So did Clara. Rhett accepted gratefully, still getting used to the idea that he had friends now. That the town, or at least part of it, had decided he and Leora were worth supporting. The night before they were supposed to leave, a storm rolled in. Not as bad as the one that had damaged the barn, but strong enough to rattle the windows and make the horses nervous. Leora woke Rhett in the middle of the night, her hand on his shoulder. He sat up, alert. What's wrong? She pointed toward the window. At first, Rhett didn't see anything unusual. Then he noticed the orange glow on the horizon. Fire. He was out of bed in seconds, pulling on his boots. Leora was right behind him, already dressed. They ran outside to see the western sky lit up with flames. That's the Henderson place, Rhett said, his stomach dropping. We have to... But Leora was already running to the barn. By the time Rhett caught up, she had both horses saddled and ready. They rode hard through the storm, the wind pushing against them like a living thing. The smell of smoke got stronger as they approached the Henderson ranch. When they crested the rise, Rhett's heart sank. The barn was fully engulfed, flames reaching into the sky. He could see figures running around with buckets, trying to contain it, but it was clearly hopeless. The barn was lost. The question now was whether the fire would spread to the house. Clara saw them coming and ran to meet them. The horses, she shouted over the roar of the fire. They're trapped. The door jammed when we tried to open it. Rhett looked at the burning barn, calculating. The main door was blocked by fallen timbers. There was no way in from that side. But Leora was already moving. She rode straight toward the barn, dismounting in one smooth motion. Before Rhett could stop her, she was running along the side of the building, looking for another way in. Leora! Rhett shouted, but she couldn't hear him. He ran after her, his heart in his throat. She'd found a side door, smaller, half hidden behind equipment. The wood was hot to the touch, but not yet burning. Leora grabbed a bucket of water someone had dropped and dumped it over herself. Then she wrapped her coat around her face and pulled the door open. Smoke poured out. Rhett grabbed her arm. You can't go in there. She looked at him, and he saw determination in her eyes. She signed, horses, dying. It's too dangerous. But she was already inside, disappearing into the smoke. Son of a bitch, Rhett muttered. He grabbed another bucket, soaked himself, and followed her in. The interior of the barn was hell, flames everywhere, smoke so thick Rhett could barely see 3 feet ahead. The heat was incredible, pressing against him like a physical thing. He found Leora by the horse stalls, working frantically to open the gates. The horses were screaming, high, terrible sounds that barely carried over the roar of the fire. 3 horses, all panicking, all trying to kick their way free. Rhett helped her with the gates. Together they got them open, but the horses were too frightened to move. They just stood there, frozen with terror. Leora did something then that Rhett would remember for the rest of his life. She walked right up to the nearest horse, a big stallion that was kicking and screaming, and put her hand on his neck. The horse stopped. Just stopped. Like someone had flipped a switch. She kept her hand there, steady despite the chaos, and started walking toward the door. The horse followed her like a dog on a leash. The other 2 saw their companion moving and followed. Rhett ran ahead, making sure the path was clear. A beam crashed down behind them, sending up a shower of sparks. The heat was so intense now that Rhett's skin felt like it was blistering. But Leora kept walking, kept that horse calm, and within 30 seconds they were all outside. Rhett, Leora, and 3 terrified horses. The crowd that had gathered erupted in cheers. Emma ran forward to take one of the horses, then another person grabbed the second. Leora kept the stallion close until he'd calmed enough to be led away. Then she collapsed. Rhett caught her before she hit the ground. Her face was black with soot, her coat singed, her hands burned. But she was breathing. "I've got you," Rhett said, carrying her away from the heat. "I've got you." Clara appeared with water and blankets. They laid Leora down and Clara examined her quickly. "She'll be all right. Just smoke and some burns. Nothing permanent." Rhett wanted to shake her, or kiss her, or both. Instead, he just held her hand while she coughed and gasped for clean air. When she could finally breathe normally again, she opened her eyes and looked at Rhett. She signed weakly. "Horses? Safe. All of them. Because of you." He signed it clearly so she couldn't miss it. "You are the bravest person I have ever known." She smiled, then coughed again. Clara made her drink water while Rhett sat there, his heart still racing. The barn burned through the night. They saved the house, barely, by creating a fire break. By dawn, all that was left of the Henderson barn was smoking ruins and exhausted people covered in soot. But the horses were alive. Clara found Rhett and Leora as the sun was rising. She'd been crying, her face streaked with tears and ash. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Those horses, they're everything to us. Without them, we'd lose the ranch." "Thank Leora," Rhett said. "She's the one who went in." Clara turned to Leora and signed something Emma had taught her. "Thank you. You saved everything." Leora signed back. "I'm glad I could help." Word of what Leora had done spread through town faster than the fire had spread through the barn. By the time Rhett and Leora made it back to their ranch, exhausted and filthy, they found a dozen people waiting in their yard. Morrison was there. The Brennan brothers. Sam Porter. Even some of the younger men who'd ridden with torches that night. "We heard what happened," Daniel Brennan said. "Wanted to make sure you both were all right." "We're fine," Rhett said, confused by the crowd. "We also wanted to say something," Morrison added. He looked uncomfortable. "About how we treated you, both of you. We were wrong, dead wrong, and we're sorry." The others nodded. One of the younger men, a kid named Will, who'd been particularly vocal that night, stepped forward. "You saved Mrs. Henderson's horses, ma'am," he said to Leora, speaking slowly so she could read his lips. "You could have died in there, but you went in anyway. That's not cursed. That's heroic." Leora looked overwhelmed. She signed, "I just did what needed doing." "That's more than most of us would have done," Will said. "And we want you to know, both of you, that you're part of this community now. Anyone gives you trouble, they give all of us trouble." Rhett felt his throat tighten. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Sam said. "Just let us help you get to Austin. Make sure that judge sees sense. We'll come with you," Daniel added, "as witnesses, to tell them what kind of person Leora really is." Rhett looked at Leora. She was crying, silent tears streaming down her soot-stained face, but she was smiling too. She signed to Rhett, "Tell them thank you. Tell them it means everything." Rhett translated, his own voice rough with emotion. That night, after everyone had left, Rhett and Leora sat together in the bath, a luxury they rarely indulged in, heating enough water to fill the copper tub taking forever. But they both needed to wash the smoke and ash away, and neither wanted to be alone. "Today was terrifying," Rhett said, signing as he spoke. Leora nodded. She signed, I was scared, but horses needed help. You could have died. I know, but worth it. No, you're not allowed to die, understand? I forbid it. That got a smile. She signed, You cannot forbid death. Watch me. She laughed, that soundless laugh of hers that Rhett had learned to recognize by the way her shoulders shook. Then she got serious and signed, What if Judge in Austin says I must go back to Hanson? He won't, not after half the town testifies for you. But what if? Rhett pulled her closer, careful of her burned hands. Then we run. We go to California, or Montana, or Canada if we have to. Somewhere they can't find us. You would do that? Leave everything? Everything I care about is right here in this tub with me. The land is just land. You are home. Leora's face crumpled. She kissed him, tasting like smoke and hope, and something he couldn't quite name but knew he never wanted to lose. When they finally climbed out of the bath and dried off, Leora wrote on her slate, I want to marry you. Rhett stared at the words. I want that too. But we should wait until Austin, until you're legally free. What if I am not free? What if Judge says I belong to Hanson? Then we get married anyway, before we run. So you're legally mine, and he can't touch you. Leora erased the slate and wrote, Not yours, ours. We belong to each other. Rhett kissed her again, tasting salt from her tears. Yeah, he said against her mouth, ours. They left for Austin 2 days later with an escort of 8 riders. Sam, Clara, Emma, the Brennans, Morrison, and Will. It felt less like running and more like a parade, this group of people who'd decided that Leora and Rhett were worth fighting for. The judge's decision would determine everything. But looking at Leora riding beside him, her chin up and her eyes clear, Rhett knew that whatever happened, they'd face it together. And somehow, that was enough. Austin was bigger than Rhett had expected. A real city with brick buildings and paved streets that made their dusty town look like a sketch someone had barely bothered to finish. They arrived on a Thursday afternoon, tired and sore from 3 days of riding, and found rooms at a boarding house on the edge of town. Judge Markham's office was a 2-story building near the courthouse. The secretary, a thin woman with spectacles, looked at their group with barely concealed disapproval. The judge is very busy, she said, her eyes lingering on Leora's worn dress and the men's boots she wore. He might not be able to see you for several weeks. We'll wait, Sam said firmly, but we'll wait as long as it takes. The woman sighed and disappeared into the back office. They heard raised voices, then she returned looking sour. The judge will see you tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Don't be late. That night, Rhett couldn't sleep. He lay next to Leora in the narrow boarding house bed, listening to her breathe, thinking about all the ways tomorrow could go wrong. What if Markham was the kind of judge who didn't care about right and wrong, only about what the law said on paper? What if Hanson had connections they didn't know about? Leora stirred beside him and touched his face in the darkness. Even without seeing, she knew he was awake. She signed against his palm, a trick she'd taught him, tracing the shapes of letters so they could talk in the dark. Cannot sleep? No, Rhett signed back, worried. Me too. They lay there in silence for a while. Then Leora signed. If Judge says I must go back, I will not fight. I will go. Rhett sat up so fast he nearly fell out of bed. He fumbled for the lamp, lit it, and grabbed the slate they kept on the nightstand. You're not going back to him. We agreed. We run if we have to. Leora took the slate. I cannot let you lose everything because of me. Your land, your home, your life. You are my life. She stared at what he'd written, her eyes filling with tears. Then she wrote, What if I am not enough? What if someday you regret choosing me over everything else? Rhett set down the slate and took her face in his hands, making sure she could see him clearly in the lamplight. Never, he said, knowing she could read his lips. Never. Then he signed it, slow and clear. I will never regret you. Leora kissed him like she was drowning and he was air. When they finally broke apart, she wrote on the slate, I love you more than I know how to say. Then show me, Rhett wrote and pulled her close. They made love that night with a desperation that had nothing to do with passion and everything to do with fear. Fear that this might be the last time, that tomorrow the law would tear them apart, that love wasn't always enough to protect the people you cared about. But for those few hours, none of that mattered. It was just the two of them, holding on to each other like the world outside didn't exist. Judge Thaddeus Markham was a man in his 60s with white hair and eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. He listened to Hanson's case first. The man had hired a lawyer, a slick-talking fellow from Houston, who argued that Hanson had every legal right to Leora's custody until her debt was paid. The girl was in Mr. Hanson's care for nearly 3 years, the lawyer said. He fed her, clothed her, provided shelter. That comes to a considerable sum. Mr. Calloway here paid a mere $20, which my client accepted as a temporary payment, not a full purchase. That's a lie, Rhett said, but the judge held up a hand. You'll get your turn, Mr. Calloway? Markham looked at the lawyer. Do you have documentation showing this alleged debt? The lawyer produced papers, receipts for food purchases, clothing, medical supplies. They looked official enough, though Rhett suspected half of them were fabricated. And what does the girl owe in total? Markham asked. $240, Your Honor, plus interest. Markham's eyebrows went up. That's a considerable sum for someone who can't work. She worked, Hanson interjected. Cleaning, cooking, mending. She earned her keep. Then why does she owe you money? Hanson faltered. Well, the cost of keeping someone like her is high. She required special attention. Special attention, Markham repeated flatly. He looked at Leora, who sat between Rhett and Clara, her hands folded in her lap. Does the girl speak? She's deaf, Your Honor, Rhett said, and mostly mute, but she understands. She reads lips and writes. I see. Markham gestured to Emma, who'd been standing near the back. Young lady, I'm told you can communicate with her using hand signs. Emma nodded nervously. Yes, sir. Then please ask her, does she owe Mr. Hanson money? Emma signed the question. Leora's response was immediate and fierce, her hands moving fast. Emma translated. She says no. She says Mr. Hanson beat her, starved her, and treated her like an animal. She says she owes him nothing but contempt. Hanson's face went red. She's lying. She's simple-minded and doesn't understand. She seems to understand perfectly well, Markham interrupted. He turned to Rhett. Your turn, Mr. Calloway. Make your case. Rhett stood, his throat dry. He'd never been good with words, never been comfortable speaking in front of people, but this mattered too much to mess up. Your Honor, I was at the auction where Mr. Hanson sold Leora. He had her tied up like livestock. He sold her to me for $20. No conditions mentioned. There were witnesses. Half my town was there. Can any of these witnesses testify? Sam stood. I can, Your Honor. I was there. Hanson sold the girl outright. There was no mention of debt or temporary custody. Morrison stood next. I ran the auction. I heard the whole transaction. It was a straight sale. One by one, the others stood. Daniel Brennan, his brother Jack, even Will, the young man who'd carried a torch that night. Each one testified to the same thing. Hanson had sold Leora with no strings attached. Hanson's lawyer tried to argue that the witnesses were biased, that they were covering for Rhett because they were friends. But Markham cut him off. I've heard enough testimony. Now I want to hear about character. He looked at Leora. Tell me about this girl. What kind of person is she? Clara stood. She's the bravest person I've ever met, Your Honor. A week ago, my barn caught fire. My horses were trapped inside. Leora ran into that burning building and saved all 3 of them. She could have died, but she went in anyway because she knew those animals needed help. Markham's expression softened slightly. That's quite admirable. She's also got a gift with animals, Rhett added. She can calm a spooked horse with just a touch. She senses things. Storms coming, danger approaching. She saved my life more than once just by paying attention to things nobody else notices. Some in the town thought she was cursed, Sam said. But she's not. She's just different. And she's taught us that different doesn't mean dangerous. It means valuable in ways we didn't expect. The testimonies continued. Each person shared a story about Leora, how she'd helped someone, predicted something, shown kindness when she had every reason to be bitter. By the time they finished, even Hanson's lawyer looked uncomfortable. Markham was quiet for a long moment, studying Leora. Then he said, "I'd like to speak with the girl alone, just her and the translator." Rhett's stomach dropped. "Your Honor." "Alone, Mr. Calloway. I need to hear from her without anyone influencing her answers." Rhett wanted to argue, but Clara touched his arm. "It's all right. Emma will take care of her." They filed out of the office, leaving Leora and Emma inside with the judge. Rhett paced the hallway, his hands clenched into fists. What was Markham asking her? What if Leora said something wrong? What if— "Stop," Sam said. "You're going to wear a hole in the floor." "I can't just stand here."
Yes, you can, because that girl in there is stronger than you think. She'll handle this. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. When the door finally opened, Emma came out first, her eyes red like she'd been crying. Then Leora, looking pale but composed. And finally Markham, his expression unreadable. "Everyone back inside," the judge said. They filed back in, Rhett immediately moving to Leora's side. She took his hand and squeezed hard.
Markham settled behind his desk and picked up his pen. "I've made my decision, but before I announce it, I want to say something about the law." Here it comes, Rhett thought, the part where he tells us the law doesn't care about right and wrong. "The law," Markham continued, "is supposed to protect people. All people. Not just the ones who can speak or hear or pay lawyers. When the law fails to protect the vulnerable, it fails at its most fundamental purpose." He looked at Hansen. "Mr. Hansen, your treatment of this girl was reprehensible. I don't believe for 1 second that she owes you money. I believe you saw an opportunity to profit from someone's disability, and you took it. That makes you a coward and a bully." Hansen started to protest, but Markham silenced him with a look. "As for the legal question of ownership, there is no such thing. You cannot own a person. I don't care what papers you claim to have or what debts you claim she owes. Leora is a free woman and has been since the day she was born." He turned to Rhett. "Mr. Calloway, the girl tells me you've treated her with respect and kindness, that you've given her a home and asked for nothing in return. Is this true?" "Yes, sir." "She also tells me you want to marry her. Is that true as well?" Rhett felt his face heat. "Yes, sir. If she'll have me." "She says she will." Markham smiled slightly. "Young lady, you have good taste. This man fought for you when he had nothing to gain and everything to lose. That's the mark of someone worth keeping." Leora squeezed Rhett's hand tighter. Markham picked up his stamp and brought it down on a document with a solid thunk. "My ruling is as follows. Leora is a free woman. Any claims Mr. Hansen had on her are hereby nullified. She is free to live where she chooses and with whom she chooses. Furthermore, Mr. Hansen, you are ordered to pay the court costs for this proceeding. Consider yourself lucky I'm not charging you with fraud." The room erupted. Clara hugged Emma. Sam clapped Rhett on the back. The Brennan brothers were grinning like idiots. Hansen was shouting something about appealing, but his lawyer was already packing up his briefcase, clearly wanting nothing more to do with this case. Rhett turned to Leora, who was crying. He signed, "Free. You're free." She signed back, We are free." And she was right. Because Rhett realized that he'd been carrying his father's ghost for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to just be himself. But Leora had seen him, really seen him, and loved him anyway. That had freed something in him he didn't even know was chained. They got married 3 days later in a small church in Austin. Clara stood as witness, Emma signed the ceremony for Leora, and Sam gave Rhett a ring that had belonged to his mother, a simple gold band that fit Leora's finger perfectly. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, but Rhett barely heard it. He was too busy watching Leora's face, the way she smiled when she signed her vows, the way her eyes never left his. When the preacher said he could kiss his bride, Rhett pulled Leora close and kissed her like they had all the time in the world. Because now they did. The ride back to the ranch took 4 days because they weren't in a hurry anymore. The group that had come with them to Austin peeled off one by one as they got closer to home, until it was just Rhett and Leora riding side by side across the Texas plains. "You know what's funny?" Rhett said, signing as he spoke. "I went to that auction looking for a wounded horse. That's all. Just a horse that needed fixing." Leora smiled and signed. "You found 2. "Yeah, I guess I did." "You fixed the mare." She signed. "Who fixed you?" Rhett thought about that. "You did. You fixed me without even trying." Leora signed.
You are not broken, just lonely. Same thing sometimes. She considered this, then signed, maybe we fix each other. Yeah, Red agreed. I like that better. When they crested the final rise and the ranch came into view, Rhett felt something settle in his chest. The barn was still half repaired, the house still weathered and worn. But it looked different now. It looked like home. They settled into a rhythm over the following months. Winter hit hard that year, with snow that lasted weeks and temperatures that made the horses' breath freeze in the air. But inside the house, Rhett and Leora were warm.
She taught him more sign language every day until he could have whole conversations with her without needing the slate. He taught her to read better, sounding out words with her until her pronunciation improved. She still spoke rarely, her voice unused for so long that forming words was hard work. But when she did, Rhett treasured every syllable. The town changed too. Slowly at first, then faster. People who'd once feared Leora started seeking her out for help. When Morrison's wife got sick with a fever that wouldn't break, Leora made a tea from herbs she'd been growing in the garden. The fever broke within hours. When the Brennan brothers lost a calf to what looked like colic, Leora spent 3 hours massaging its stomach until the blockage passed. The calf survived. When Will's younger sister went missing in the woods after a spring storm, Leora was the one who found her, following tracks nobody else could see, sensing somehow where a frightened child would hide. Word spread. People started calling her the woman who listens with her heart, because even though she couldn't hear with her ears, she seemed to understand people and animals in ways that ran deeper than sound. Some still thought it was strange. Some still whispered about curses and dark magic. But most people just recognized what Rhett had known all along, that Leora was special in the best possible way. 5 years passed, the ranch prospered. Rhett bred horses now, using the mare's bloodline to create a stock that was known throughout the territory for being gentle and smart. Leora worked with each foal from birth, imprinting them with her calmness, teaching them to trust. They were making enough money to hire help, though neither of them wanted it. They liked the quiet, the solitude, the life they'd built with their own hands. Emma came to visit often, now a young woman of 17 who'd learned more sign language than anyone in town. She and Leora could have conversations that lasted hours, their hands moving too fast for most people to follow. Clara and Sam became regular fixtures at Sunday dinners. The Brennan brothers stopped by to trade horses and gossip. Even Morrison, who'd once thought Leora was cursed, sent his granddaughter to learn about herbs and healing. The ranch that had once been empty and silent was full of life now. One evening in late spring, Rhett found Leora standing by the corral, watching the sunset. She was wearing the blue dress he'd bought her for their anniversary, the first real dress she'd owned, not made from flour sacks or hand-me-downs. He walked up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. She leaned back against him, completely comfortable, completely at peace. "What are you thinking about?" Rhett asked, signing the question against her shoulder. Leora turned to face him. She'd learned to speak more over the years, though her voice was still rough and her words still came slowly. But she used it now because she knew how much Rhett loved hearing it. "Thinking about the first day," she said carefully. "The auction. That was a long time ago." "Not so long." She touched his face. "You looked angry when you saw Hanson with me. Very angry. I was angry. At him. At the whole damn situation. But you bought me anyway." "Best $20 I ever spent." She smiled. "Best $20 I ever cost." That made Rhett laugh. She'd developed a sense of humor over the years, dry and unexpected, showing up at the strangest times. "I have something to tell you," Leora said, her hand moving to his chest. "Important thing." Rhett's heart skipped. "What?" "I am—" She struggled with the words, then gave up and signed it instead. Pregnant. The world stopped. Rhett stared at her, his brain trying to process what she'd just told him. "You're—" She nodded, her eyes bright with tears and joy. She signed, 3 months. "I wanted to be sure before I tell you." "We're having a baby," Rhett said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. "We're having a baby." Leora laughed, that soundless laugh of hers, and nodded again. Rhett picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like idiots. When he set her down, he knelt in front of her and pressed his ear to her stomach, even though there was nothing to hear yet. "Hey in there,"
he said quietly. I'm your father, and I promise you right now, I'm going to be better than mine. I'm going to love you and protect you and teach you that different is just another word for special. Your mother is going to teach you that too. She's the strongest person I've ever met, and you're lucky to have her. Leora's hand came down on his head, stroking his hair. When he looked up, she was crying. She signed, I am scared.
Me too, Rhett admitted. But we'll figure it out, together. Always together, Leora signed. Always. Their daughter was born on a cold January morning after a labor that lasted 16 hours. Rhett had never been so terrified in his life. Watching Leora in pain, unable to do anything but hold her hand and count contractions. But when Clara finally placed the baby in Leora's arms, a tiny wrinkled thing with dark hair and gray eyes, everything else fell away. She's perfect, Clara said, smiling. Completely perfect. Rhett looked at his wife holding their daughter, both of them crying, and felt something crack wide open in his chest. This was what happiness looked like. This was what he'd been missing his whole life without knowing it. They named her Grace because that's what she was, unearned, unexpected, and more precious than anything Rhett had ever deserved. As Grace grew, it became clear that she could hear. Rhett would whisper her name from across the room, and she'd turn toward him, smiling. It was bittersweet. Leora would never hear her daughter's voice, never know what she sounded like. But Leora didn't seem to mind. She communicated with Grace the same way she communicated with everyone else, through touch, through signs, through that deep understanding that ran beneath words. Grace's first words were signed, not spoken. Mama, Dada, horse, home. By the time she was 3, she was fluent in both sign language and English, switching between them effortlessly. She became Leora's voice when they went into town, translating for people who didn't know signs. Mama says thank you, Grace would say, her tiny voice serious. Mama says the horse needs new shoes. Mama says she'll make you tea if you come visit. The town fell in love with her the way they'd eventually fallen in love with Leora, slowly, then all at once. More years passed. Grace grew into a bright, curious child who had her mother's gift with animals and her father's stubborn determination. She brought home every injured creature she found, birds with broken wings, rabbits with torn ears, once a fox kit that had lost its mother. Leora taught her how to heal them, how to listen to what they needed, how to be patient. Rhett taught her how to ride, how to mend fences, how to stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. By the time Grace was 10, the ranch had become a kind of sanctuary. People came from all over the territory to buy horses from the Calloways, but they also came for other reasons. They came when they needed healing, physical or otherwise. They came when they needed someone to listen. They came because Leora and Rhett had created something rare in a hard world. A place where being different wasn't dangerous, where kindness mattered more than words, where everyone was welcome. Hanson had died a few years back, drunk, alone, and unmourned. Rhett felt nothing when he heard the news. The man had been erased from his life so completely that learning of his death was like hearing about a stranger. Sam Porter grew old gracefully, eventually passing the feed store to his son. Clara Henderson remained a steadfast friend until she died peacefully in her sleep at 72. Emma married a teacher from Austin and had 4 children of her own, each one learning sign language from birth. The Brennan brothers retired from ranching and spent their days playing cards at Morrison's store, telling anyone who'd listen about the time they rode to Austin to testify for that deaf girl who saved the Calloway name. One evening, when Rhett was 52 and Leora 36, they sat on the porch watching Grace practice with a new foal in the corral. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that hurt to look at. Leora leaned against Rhett's shoulder, her hair, streaked with gray now, tucked under his chin. He could feel her heartbeat, steady and strong. She pulled out the old slate they kept on the porch for moments like this. She wrote, "Do you remember what you said that first night after the town came?" "Which part?" "You said losing me would be worse than anything they could do." "I remember." She erased it and wrote, "I feel same about you, every day, for 17 years now." Rhett took the slate. "Only 17 feels like forever." "Good forever or bad forever?" she wrote, smiling. "Best forever." Leora set down the slate and spoke out loud, her voice clearer now after years of practice.
I love you, Rhett Calloway. I love you too, Rhett said, pulling her close. Grace called out from the corral. Mama, look what she can do. The foal was trotting in a perfect circle, responding to Grace's hand signals. Leora clapped, beaming with pride. Rhett watched his daughter and his wife, these two people who'd taken his empty life and filled it with purpose, and thought about that day at the auction 17 years ago. He'd gone looking for a wounded horse and found a wounded girl instead. But the truth was, they'd all been wounded. The whole town had been wounded, by fear, by prejudice, by the need to blame someone for the randomness of bad luck. Leora had healed all of them just by being herself, by showing them that strength came in forms they didn't expect, that communication ran deeper than words, that love could exist in silence and still shake the foundation of the world. Hey, Rhett said, and Leora turned to look at him. Thank you. She tilted her head in question. For choosing me back. That night on the porch. You could have run. Should have run. But you stayed. Leora smiled and signed, Where else would I go? You are my home. You're mine too, Rhett said. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon and the stars began appearing one by one, Rhett thought about all the things he'd learned over the years. That love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect words. It was about showing up every day and choosing each other, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. That family wasn't just blood. It was the people who stood beside you when the world came with torches. The people who saw you at your worst and loved you anyway. That strength looked different on different people. Sometimes it was loud and defiant. Sometimes it was quiet and persistent. Both kinds mattered. And that the best things in life, the things worth fighting for, often came disguised as something you didn't think you wanted. A wounded horse, a frightened girl, a life that didn't look anything like the one you'd planned. Grace ran up to the porch, breathless and excited. Mama, did you see? She's learning so fast. Leora signed. I saw. You did wonderful. Can we keep training after dinner? It's getting dark, Rhett said. Tomorrow. Grace pouted but nodded. She was about to run back inside when she stopped and looked at her parents sitting close together on the porch. You two are being mushy again. Guilty, Rhett admitted. Grace rolled her eyes, so much like her mother, and went inside. Leora laughed and signed to Rhett. She is growing up. Too fast. We were lucky to find each other, she signed. Very lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it, Rhett said. That was all you, being brave enough to trust me, being strong enough to stay when staying was the hardest thing. Leora took his face in her hands and spoke, slow and careful. I do not need sound. Only you. The words hit Rhett like they always did, harder every time because they were true. She didn't need the world's noise or validation. She just needed this, them. The life they'd built from nothing but determination and love. I hear you, Rhett said, his voice rough. Always. Inside the house, Grace was setting the table for dinner. The horses nickered softly in the barn. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate and was answered. And on the porch of a small ranch in Texas, a man and a woman sat together in comfortable silence, holding hands and watching the stars emerge. They'd survived everything the world had thrown at them, prejudice, fear, cruelty, doubt, and come out the other side stronger for it. They'd learned that the loudest love stories were the ones never spoken aloud, that kindness was worth more than gold, that home wasn't a place but a person, and sometimes that person came into your life in the most unexpected way. Rhett Calloway had gone to an auction looking for a wounded mare. Instead, he'd found salvation in the form of a 19-year-old deaf girl who saw him not as his father's son, but as himself. And Leora, who'd spent years being told she was worthless, had found a man who'd fight the world for her, and a daughter who'd carry their story forward. In the end, that was all anyone could hope for. To be seen, to be loved, to matter. The rest was just noise.